Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session on wildfire prevention technologies, or actually just wildfire prevention in general. I want to welcome you to this session. Before we get too deep into it, I do want to say that we have a WebEx going on right now. So for those people who are on the WebEx, we want to make sure that they can hear everything that's happening. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and Yahui here on to my right, your left, we'll be bringing a microphone around. So we want to make sure that everyone on the WebEx can hear well. I will say that the sensitivity of this mic at the podium is much greater than the one at the table. So it may be you might get some difference in the room depending on where people are sitting. But we'll try to modulate our voices along the way. The way I'm going to have the session run is we're going to go through all of the speakers first, and then we'll end the session with the Q&A. So I want to make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A, but I want to hold off on Q&A because I think we're going to get some interesting perspectives, and I want multiple people to be able to respond to the questions rather than just the one that's at the podium. So you can hold off your questions until the end. That would be great after all the presentations are over. So let me kick this off. My name is David Earn. I'm with the California Energy Commission. I lead our technology integration systems research, which is basically the research that touches the grid. And so this is obviously one of the areas within my team that we are focusing on, and I'll talk a little about that in a minute. As everyone is clearly aware, wildfire is a problem and will continue to be a problem. As you can see from this research that was done by Leroy Westerling for the fourth annual climate assessment, or the fourth climate assessment, wildfire risk to the grid and from the grid is going to be growing because of the changes in conditions in the state. So what you're going to be hearing today is actually two perspectives. So there's clearly a concern that if wildfire erupts, that it's going to affect the grid, and obviously there's potential that the grid can actually result in a wildfire. But also we have this incredible network of infrastructure around the state that can be utilized to help us get a better sense of the conditions and be able to identify where conditions are at risk. And so you're going to hear a variety of different perspectives from the panel today, including what those risks might be like as we move forward, but also how the utilities particularly are using, looking at additional networks, adding to their network to be able to get a better sense of what the conditions are like, but then also put technologies in place that could help mitigate the potential for a wildfire. What you're going to be hearing today is EPIC-funded research plus. So the EPIC Symposium is really to focus on those things that are EPIC-funded, but there's a lot of work that's been going on in this area outside of EPIC. And so I've asked particularly our investor-owned utilities to be able to talk more broadly about what they've been putting in place now and what they're looking at in the future, which is broader than just EPIC. But it's important for everyone to get that perspective because there's a lot of work that's been done, and I don't want to limit it to just the EPIC-funded research at this point. So it'll be very broad. And where something is very EPIC-focused, they'll mention the EPIC focus associated with that. But we all have work that we're doing to move this thing forward. One thing I do want to say is you'll hear from Dr. Larry Dale, who was funded by research from the Energy Commission, and you'll hear about his work and research that looks at the potential future risk to the electric system from wildfires. We also have an ongoing solicitation that I want to make folks aware of right now, which is this grant funding opportunity to help look at a broader tool that can be utilized by the utilities and by the state that will not only help look at forecasts for what the problems might be within, say, the next 7 days, but then what might happen over many decades. And this research, which is currently in the proposal stage, so we have not received the proposals yet, will help us develop a tool that will be more broadly used by the state and help us be more predictive in the near term and the long term. And it'll also be utilized to help set up some scenarios and do some modeling for the fifth climate assessment. So I just want to make folks aware of that. You can go on our research page and you can see the solicitation. And if you aren't already working on it, you can at least be aware of what's going on. And the proposals will be due March 13th, very soon. And then we'll go through the process of the selection for that award. $5 million, up to $5 million, and it'll be a single award. So let me move on to technology. So The CPUC uses this graphic, which I think is very helpful for those who are not familiar with wildfire, and they'll think about the potential solution, the current solutions and the potential solutions for wildfire mitigation. You can think about it in terms of fuel management, so that's cutting back trees, et cetera, to make the corridor safer and less likely that branches will hit the line. System management, which is kind of hardening, putting devices on the electrical system so that those can be preventing wildfire. But also, you can have equipment being put on the system that helps you monitor the weather, be able to predict and identify where those risk conditions are going to be greatest, and so the utilities can take action in advance. So it's nice to think about these things in kind of three buckets, but the reality is they all overlap. All right, so you can take any one of these, and there's probably some touch point between where they're currently located and one of the adjacent circles, but it's a way to help think about it. The Energy Commission, although we have funded science in the past associated with this, and Larry will talk about that, we have not done any work on ignition prevention technology. It's a new area that we want to focus on with our upcoming EPIC research funding. But we recognize that there's a lot of work that's going on at the utilities in this space, and so it was really important for us, as all of our EPIC administrators, the utilities, and the Energy Commission, to coordinate and collaborate on that research. And so late last summer, we started a working group to help identify those, the major risks, and start honing in to identify where we can coordinate and collaborate to make sure that our research is not overlapping, unless, of course, overlap is important. But also just make sure that we're all in the same phase. And so we've had several working groups. These are public workshops where we've held and started talking about those individual research areas and helped to hone in on some specific areas that we want to focus on. For the Energy Commission, we have then taken some of that information. We're doing our own market research and talking to a number of vendors, trying to understand the state of the current technology, a lot of new technologies that are out there. And some of those are funneled to us directly, or we found them directly. And our Public Utility Commission working group members have also been bringing a lot of those technologies to our awareness so that we can get a better handle on the different sets of options. That will then inform a grant funding opportunity that the Energy Commission will put out, and that will probably be coming out in the June-July timeframe of this year. We'll be looking at funding some research projects around ignition prevention. The one thing I will point out that is helpful from a perspective of the EPIC program is the way the EPIC program was set up. The Energy Commission can do both applied research and demonstrations. The utilities were limited to only being able to do demonstrations. So we're, again, looking at this collaboration for where we might need to look at applied research to help bring a technology to a more commercial setting, but then also working with the utilities on how those can be demonstrated. And so we're taking that into account as we develop this GFO so we can make it the most useful as we can for the market. We also have a little bit more funding flexibility, so it's possible we could have larger size demonstrations than maybe the utilities are able to with their EPIC funding. But we'll be looking at trying to bring that all together this summer in an open solicitation, so look forward to that. So let me bring you to the panel. So these are the folks who are going to talk really about the meat of what has been done and what is going on in their respective worlds. And so I want to introduce each of our panel members. And each of them will come up and give about an 8-minute presentation. We'll just segue from one to the next, and then we'll have Q&A after that. So let me first introduce to my left Dr. Larry Dale, who's a staff scientist with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. He has worked in energy, water, and climate change policy issues at the lab for over 20 years. He has led studies on the impacts of climate change and water resources in California at UC Berkeley. And his current one of his current research efforts is around wildfire and the electric grid. Next to him is Brian D'Agostino from San Diego Gas and Electric. He is the Director of Fire Science and Climate Adaptation. He's responsible for meteorology, fire science, and community fire safety programs and climate adaptation initiatives. He oversaw the development of SDG&E's large Weather Network, which is one of the most sophisticated and most well-distributed of any of the utilities in the United States, and he'll be talking some about that today. He's also an advisor and former chair of the American Meteorological Society, National Energy Committee, and he serves on several advisory committees for that as well. And lastly, we have Dr. Brian Chen, who's a program manager of Grid Resiliency and Public Safety Program Management Office within Southern California Edison. He oversees an enterprise-wide program management office responsible for developing grid resiliency measures to enhance SCE's wildfire mitigation program. He previously served in many roles with SCE, including leadership in engineering, business planning, strategic planning, and corporate finance. And prior to joining Edison, he was with a premier investigative engineering firm in Texas. So with that, you have our illustrious panel, and I will bring up Dr. Dale to talk first about his research.
All right, we've got that nice red font. Can you see this? Can't really see it. Anyway, so I'm here, I think, to kind of motivate the talks that are going to be given by the utility specialists on technologies that are being developed to protect against wildfires. But my study was a pretty focused study. It was supposed to be sort of a boring study of fire impacts on the grid. What's happened to the electricity grid because of wildfires? And it began as a pretty standard look at past wildfires, how they approached different assets of the electricity grid, transmission and distribution, what happened when it approached those assets, and a few ideas about what we can do about it. Moving to the next slide gives you a better idea what I mean by this. You can see on the left and the right the parts of the transmission grid and distribution grid that we focused on. It was a sample. Less than half of the transmission grid was included. And you can see in that map of the state different portions of the grid that were part of our study. And on the right, you can see another similar map of the state focused on the urban areas that we thought were most affected by wildfires, including all the major San Francisco, Sacramento, San Diego, and Los Angeles. Taking one of those samples, looking on the left there, is a part of the transmission grid. This is the inner tie between the Northwest and California. It gives California access to all the hydropower that's produced up in the Columbia River Basin. Important to California because we have a lot of green energy goals. On the right is the region around Los Angeles, and you can see in both places all those little sort of pink or reddish-looking blobs. Those are wildfires. And we only looked at a pretty short time period, between 2000 and 2016. But even in that one small part of the state up at the top there were about 100 wildfires in that 16-year period. And of those, 16 came close enough to the grid that we thought we should look at it to see what kind of impacts occurred. On the right, around Los Angeles, there were way more wildfires. And Southern California is subject to far more wildfires than we are in Northern California. Living up here, you may not know that, but it's definitely the case. So what happened when these wildfires came up against these parts of the transmission grid? Well, here's just a chart showing how we worked with CalISO. It's the agency that helps manage the grid for the state. And we worked with them to find out what happened to about over 300 wildfires that approached those portions of the transmission grid. And what's shown there is maybe indicative of what generally happens. Most of the time, nothing happens. Wildfire come up against the transmission line, There's no outage. There's no disruption of service. There's no damage to the transmission line. And the system remains stable. There's no impact on generation either. But some of the time, there are some kinds of outages that occur, short outages sometimes, longer in other times. Maybe more common is that they have to shut off portions of the the generation system in order to access generation that won't be using lines that are threatened by wildfires. But the general picture is a small portion of the time you have large impacts. A large portion of the time you have small impacts or no impacts. That was true for transmission, also really true for distribution. Next, I want to talk about what the models are saying about future wildfires. And the basic story shown there at the bottom is that Southern California fire risk is now highest in the state and has been for the entire record. But in the future, we anticipate large increases in wildfire risk in the mountainous areas for a lot of reasons that you may have heard about. Possibly it's about drought, possibly it's about increasing biomass in forested areas. We're not thinning the forests as we used to. It could be about more homes that are up there, more people causing wildfires. It's really a bit of an open question, but future risk is growing, particularly in Northern California. The last part of the study was an evaluation of different adaptation options. What can we do about it? And these were very broad picture, big picture kind of ideas about what could be done. You're going to hear a lot more about the details, the technologies that can be used to eliminate wildfire risk. But in this case, we just looked at big picture options like undergrounding distribution, future planning that would limit the area of wildfire, urban wildland interface, the WUI areas that you've heard about, in order to eliminate exposure to wildfires. You can have microgrids to get rid of transmission lines, and you can diversify transmission. So those are just some sort of big picture ideas. But the real, if my object here is to motivate the future discussions you're going to hear today, I should say the whole study we did was in some sense overtaken by events. The major person working on our GIS mapping had to leave her house because of the Napa fires, so that delayed the study by a couple of months. The wildfires in 2017 and 2018 effectively dated our study because the cost of those fires were roughly equal to the cost of all the fires between 2000 and 2016. So we kind of had to double the estimates of annual risk because of fires in 1 year that came at the end of our study. And then finally, it kind of got derailed because so much of the interest in this has not just been about fire impacts on the grid, but also how the grid is impacting wildfires. And we didn't even look at that issue. But that's an issue that is of major concern now to all the utilities. And on that note, I'll turn to you.
All right, great. Well, I will take it from there. Good morning, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, my name is Brian D'Agostino. I direct the Fire Science and Climate Adaptation Group at SDG&E. And I'm looking up at this screen here, and I'm not seeing it. Yes, perfect. All right. Well, I wanted to start off by giving a little bit of an overview of San Diego Gas and Electric Service Territory. We are in the southwest corner of the state. We operate from the Mexican border up through about the southern third of Orange County and over to Imperial County. Overall, we have about 4,100 square miles. So how I like to look at it, it's about the size of Connecticut or the Big Island. But in there, we have 3.6 million customers, over 1 million meters. And as you can see, 136 distribution substations and transmission substations, and we have a long history of wildfire in San Diego. As we heard from Dr. Larry, there is a very large impact of wildfires in Southern California and really mega fires in San Diego. If you go back to 1970, that was really where we experienced our first mega fire. It was called the Laguna Fire. And at the time, it was 186,000 acres, the largest fire in California history. And that was actually associated to power lines on Mount Laguna because we have extremely strong Santa Ana winds, which I'll talk about more here momentarily. But then we also saw in 2003, we saw a cedar fire. There was a hunter that accidentally started a fire and had major impacts on the electric infrastructure. And a lot of people said this is a once-in-a-lifetime or once-in-a-generation type of event. And then just 4 years later, there was the Witch Fire, which again was, Santa Ana winds over 100 miles an hour, driving catastrophic wildfire. So there's been an awful lot of work that has gone into fire mitigation over the last decade. And one very critical piece of this is situational awareness. It's beginning to understand the problem well enough so that you can implement very effective mitigations. So one way we do that is in multiple ways. We really look at the weather technology and the science. We also take a very close look at engineering and operations, which we'll talk about here as well. And this has major impacts on our customers, of course. So there's a very large customer outreach portion of this. But to start focusing on the fire science and the technology, we needed to understand Santa Ana winds better. And I think that's kind of the basis. How we went about doing that initially is starting in 2009, we were going to put a weather station on every single circuit that we operate in our high-risk areas. That actually resulted in 76 weather stations going in 2010. We put in another 40 in 2011, another 30 in 2012. We're at 177 today and still growing. It is, I would say it's the largest utility weather network in the country, and it has been for a long time, but now the utilities across the state of California are building similar networks that have a larger number of weather stations. But the information that we have gathered from this weather network over the last decade is priceless. Over 100 million pieces of weather data that can now inform operational decisions, which are extremely important. And it doesn't only stop with the weather stations, it also goes into camera networks. Through partnering with academia, partnering with the community, we've enabled mountaintop camera networks right now to be able to increase our situational awareness across our entire service territory, which really means, like we've never had before, if there's an ignition anywhere on the landscape, we have real-time, high-def, pan-tilt zoom capabilities to understand very quickly if we have one of these, low frequency but high impact events on our hands. And understanding that as early as possible is very important. As we progressed in our adaptation to this increase in wildfire, we needed tools to understand what was the fire risk 365 days a year. And of course, partnered with the National Weather Service, they issued red flag warnings on days where we had an extreme risk. But the reality is that we operate the electric system day and night. So we needed something that gave us the fire potential every day. For us in San Diego, this was the Fire Potential Index. It looks at some key components of wildfire: greenness of the grass, dead fuel moisture, live fuel moisture, weather, combines all those into a index that allows us to understand fire potential day in and day out. And part of the reason that this is so important is that it enables us to make good decisions with the new technology that's put onto the grid. So when you really look at some of the engineering and operational enhancements that's been made, you can see protection philosophies. Being able to operate the electric system in a sensitive relay and understanding the fire potential enough to know when to enable that sensitive relay is a really critical piece and a component of mitigating the ignitions on the electric system. The other thing you see there is a falling conductor protection. This is really where we're going, and it is kind of our future of ignition management. And it's something that as we continue in this R&D and we implement it on the system, it takes a lot of flexibility as we continue to work with EPIC, and it's long-term, and there is a lot of funding, multi-year phased approaches to actually execute projects like this. But this is where we're going as we move forward, and it's really this technology to be able to sense faults on the system so quickly that the system can react before an energized conductor hits the ground. So in a sense, we're operating even faster than gravity here. But what is a critical piece of being able to operate at these type of speeds is having an LTE network. It's the communication in place to be able to execute on this type of technology. We find that we can sample the electric system at 30 times a second, even more, and we can deal with these types of large data impacts. But a lot of what we need is we need the system to be communicating at lightning speed, and we need to have devoted LTE connections to be able to do this. So this is a lot of where we feel the future is going. It's a lot of where we envision our ongoing partnerships with EPIC moving in the future is really starting to move forward. But what it's going to require is, again, that flexibility. We have to move at the speed of technology here, which is, as we know, lightning fast. So that flexibility to be able to move and flex as the technology moves and flexes is going to be a really important success metric for us as we move forward. I think with that, my time is up, but look forward to answering any questions as we move into the next phase of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Read about the data volumes. It's going to be substantial to focus on the amount of data that we're going to be coping with.
Well, I wanted to thank David and the CEC for inviting us to come speak, and I think by the full room, this is clearly a topic that is of interest to many people. What I wanted to take a few minutes to talk through was what are some of the things that Southern California Edison is doing to combat this growing risk that Larry really set the stage for in terms of our wildfire risk across California. Edison, like the other utilities, have had many long-standing practices to mitigate against wildfire risk, but in recent years, growth of this risk has been so predominant that we felt that it was necessary to take decisive action to enhance our existing practices, and kind of put them into three main categories. The first is investing in system hardening, doing things to help prevent ignition. The second is a lot of what Brian talked about in terms of bolstering our situational awareness, better understanding the condition of the weather and the risk environment, as well as the condition of our assets. And the last area is also enhancing some of our operational practices. When we developed our mitigation strategy, we really broke it down to the fundamentals of fire science. And so for any ignition to occur or fire to occur, you really have to have three main components. One is you have to have the fuel source, need to have an ignition or heat source, and then some catalysts like oxygen. And in the context of how electric utilities can best combat these different elements, we really focused on the heat side of the triangle. So as you know, our business is really delivering energy to our customers, but if that energy gets diverted in such a way that can generate a heat source, then that creates the potential for ignition. So there are many things that we're doing to try to really eliminate or reduce the potential energy that's released. In the fuel area, obviously vegetation is a big part of this, and there are things that the utility can do to try to reduce that. But given the magnitude and scale of the dead, dying, and diseased trees that are across the state, this is more than just, I think, a utility issue to solve. And in the weather conditions, we obviously can't control the presence of oxygen, but wind speeds, humidity, and the prevalence of fire risk conditions are things that we can better understand, so we can predict when those conditions will occur, what areas of our service territory might be affected, and what responses we may need to take to mitigate. In the area of system hardening, there's a couple elements that we are deploying onto our system, and the primary one relates to covered conductors. So there are two pictures on the left-hand side. This is an insulated wire, if you will. It's kind of the state-of-the-art 3-layer insulation system. And when we look at the data associated with historical ignitions in our service area, more than half of all ignitions were associated with contact from objects. So this could be a tree branch touching a power line. It could be a palm frond that blows hundreds of yards away and comes and falls onto the power lines. It could be mylar balloons getting entangled. Those sorts of things can generate arcs and the release of the energy that's that heat side of the triangle. So using insulated conductors ultimately prevents those faults or the release of energy to begin with. In the top right, there are these faster acting fuses that we're deploying on our system as well. And these fuses operate more quickly, and they don't prevent the fault from occurring to begin with, but they reduce the amount of energy that's released. And so by reducing the amount of energy, in a sense, it can reduce the probability that an ignition might occur. And then we're also deploying fire-resistant poles. Now these, in and of themselves, don't prevent ignitions, but as Larry had talked about, there are many ignitions that occur not associated with utility infrastructure, and the survivability of our assets can reduce the impact to customers, reduce outage times and other impacts. As Brian had talked about, we are trying to expand our situational awareness capabilities. So we're very quickly trying to roll out a weather station network. Just within the year 2018, we installed 125 weather stations. And within the next couple of years, we're looking to build a network of close to 800 plus weather stations. That needs to be coupled with the ability to analyze and predict what the behavior of the weather is. So advanced weather modeling is necessary. We also are installing fire monitoring cameras on our mountaintops so that we have visible coverage of all of our high fire risk areas. And all of that information really feeds into a central situational awareness center that we have that is staffed 24/7 during emergencies. Some of these cameras actually are available, all of them are available on alertwildfire.org, so they're available to the public if you're interested in viewing them. And the last area is enhanced operational practices. So some of the things we're doing in this area include infrared scanning of our overhead infrastructure. These are like heat scans that can look for high temperatures that are abnormal, or the differential temperatures that may be at connectors could indicate that there might not be as good a connection as there should be, and can indicate maybe there's a potential for failure in the near future. So being able to scan our equipment and understand whether there are certain locations that are maybe going to fail prematurely, we can then take action and replace those connectors ahead of time. We have very robust vegetation management. We're also expanding that kind of outside of the traditional areas where trees typically grow into lines. So especially in Southern California, a lot of palm trees. Unfortunately, our veg management teams do not like palm trees very much because they have the tendency to shed palm fronds, and those can fly for almost half a mile in high winds. We have protective device settings. So this is something that Brian also talked about. These are settings that we can upload to our remote-controlled devices. These are like the fuses, if you will, or circuit breakers in your house, and they can operate much more quickly and they have much higher sensitivity. But we don't necessarily have those in place all the time because we don't want nuisance tripping. So during high fire risk conditions, those areas that are affected, our grid operators can activate those settings to help mitigate potential energy release. And then the bottom left is public safety power shutoff. So this is a situation where if the risks get extreme, then we might need to de-energize to prevent ignitions from occurring. Some of the EPIC demonstration research, I think on the kind of left side of the equation, really is around trying to mitigate against down conductors. Conductors hit the ground, they can cause this potential energy release. One of the EPIC projects that we have is around next generation distribution automation. So this technology called spread spectrum time domain reflectometry. It's actually a very neat technology where you can send audio signals, if you will, down the lines to detect where there's breaks, and it can sense that there's maybe a break in the line. There's also some technology we're using where we're utilizing our smart meter data to look at algorithms that can tell us when a downline occurs. And then the last item is an intelligent modern pole. So this is one that we're considering for inclusion in EPIC. It's a hybrid where the bottom is steel, the top is composite, and it's loaded full of sensors that can detect whether there's a fire, whether it's being overloaded, whether there's vibration from either high winds or earthquakes or other sorts of situations. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start with our Q&A time now. I'm going to start with two questions, actually, for our panels, and then I'll open it up to the room. Those who are on WebEx, you won't be able to ask questions, so you can reach out separately if you have questions that you'd like to get in touch with, get the answers for. So my first question for you, Larry, is based on what you've learned from the study that you've done and the need to kind of help understand the potential impacts of wildfire affecting the transmission distribution lines, knowing what you know now from your research, how would you think about a way to get greater granularity and more predictive capability?
Well, two things come to mind. Our study had a fairly limited time frame, and so of course I'd want to expand that time frame in order to look at past impacts of wildfires. 16 years is clearly not enough of a time period to look at. But maybe of more relevance to this panel is I think, you know, the wildfire models are being, particularly the statewide long-range models, are currently they're fairly simple. They don't include wind impacts, and they don't include changes in fuel that occur over time. Even, for example, after a wildfire, there's a lot less fuel in an area that's burned. There's several factors like that that have a big impact on fires, and we're becoming more aware of that now just over the last few years. So certainly I'd want to see more work on developing the wildfire prediction models. So that's sort of a plug for that the Energy Commission is already doing. I haven't looked, and I don't really know a lot about the situational awareness capability that's being developed, but that sounds very promising. And I guess last, I'm not familiar with the research, but certainly more research on how past fires started. That seems like a big issue. How many of them are just starting because of ordinary human causes? How many are being started because of impacts from the grid that we're just becoming aware of? I think this is an area of a lot of research interest, and I'm hopeful because it looks like there's a lot of research focused in that area.
Oh, Brian?
Yeah, I'd like to build on that a little bit, because in San Diego, there's been a huge investment in infrastructure hardening, over $1.4 billion right now since 2008. So that being said, there had to be models that helped understand the prioritization of the investment. So one in particular that comes to mind is the wildfire risk reduction model. But what that will do is go in and simulate hundreds of millions of virtual wildfires and look at what is the potential destruction from these fires. And then the system in those particular areas will be hardened first. And that's one way that San Diego's approaching this. Another way is, now that we have our weather network, we have 10 years of data. So we've actually found a transmission corridor that's prone to wind gusts over 100 miles an hour. So in those particular areas, right now there's a hardening project to rebuild Cleveland National Forest, where the transmission corridor is actually being rerouted around this wind-prone area completely. And then any of the distribution left in this area is now being built to over 110 miles per hour. And again, some people have that thought that, oh, if it's built to 110 miles per hour, it's completely safe. The reality is that flying debris becomes a huge threat to the system once you get over certain wind speeds just about anywhere. As we heard, omfrons can blow a half a mile, so especially in winds like that. But that being said, there are steps being taken and modeling being done in this area.
Thank you.
Add briefly. Okay. I think building off of that, I think some of the mega fires that we're seeing, it's obviously very important to have these wildfire simulation models that can predict the spread based on fuel and weather conditions and terrain. But some of these really big fires create their own weather systems, and the traditional models really break down. So that really can be an area for a combination of empirical measurement during those fires, as well as advancing some of our modeling capabilities based on that.
Thank you. I was going to have more questions. I'm seeing time is flying, so I'll open it up to the audience. And remember that have the microphone come around. Question back here. So make sure that you're speaking into the microphone so the folks on WebEx can hear you as well.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Funk. I'm with Caban Systems, and I'm really interested in the efforts of building out a private LTE network. I was wondering, what's your time frame for that? Are you going to partner doing that? This sounds like a really innovative effort. Thank you.
You know, what I'm going to do here is, I happen to have an expert from SDG&E. Sorry to put you on the spot, Chris, but I know, if you wouldn't mind, we're actually including this in our wildfire mitigation plan, which has been submitted, but Chris will be able to speak in more detail to this.
Yeah, my name is Chris Bolton. I'm the System Protection Engineering Manager at SDG&E, and I don't have exact time frames for you, but I know that we're testing. We have a test bed up in Ottawa going on this February for a private LTE solution that's going to test all the various use cases, including falling conductor protection. And then we're hoping to have a test bed in the field sometime mid this year, and then deployment within the next few years in our critical areas of the county.
Great. Next question. So this gentleman over here, Joey, over on the other side. Oh, yeah, he was next.
Are you modeling yet the increase in the biomass that will result from the expanded clearances along the power lines? You have an idea of what we're talking about in terms of the amount of biomass that will be generated as your clearances increase?
So there's significant tree removal that is taking place, I think, with all the utilities. And as far as Edison's practices, when we remove a tree, we actually remove it from the forest, so we don't leave it on the ground. I don't have details in terms of the volumes that's generated associated with that.
Yeah, and more now than ever, we're getting into programs to actually mitigate the amount of biomass. So we're working with local fire safe councils, fire agencies, our local tribal communities to actually embark on fuel management programs to try to reduce biomass.
Thank you, all three of you, for coming out. This is awesome. Dr. Dale,
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. My name is Mike Lowell. I'm with Amber Kinetics in the University of San Francisco. Dr. Dale, your study points to a lot of threat vectors, both sort of coming from the outside to the grid and coming from the grid to the outside. It also segments the market into sort of transmission and distribution threat analysis. And I was wondering who stands to gain the most from prevention of these events in terms of like stakeholder benefit? Is that the utility? Is that the ISO? Is it insurance companies who have to bear the cost of cataclysmic events? And like, where is analysis going to determine that answer?
At the end of the report, there was a short section in which we're trying to estimate the overall cost of wildfires. As I said, we were looking at a small sample, just cost to the grid, but I think the biggest impacts are to the people of the state of California. Loss of homes, loss of life, health impacts, those kinds of costs are, I think, far larger than the cost to the electricity grid. And I don't know, you can look at that, I think it's called a benefits appendix section. But we were, overall, while cost of the grid might be something like $50 million a year during the time period we looked at, maybe up that to 70 if you include some of the later years which had such large fires. But if you include all costs, a very rough estimate is more along the lines of $1 billion a year, and maybe by mid-century that could up to $2 billion a year or even more. And these are really crude estimates, but it does give you a sense of the scale of the kind of costs we're talking about. And even that is just a portion of the overall costs. I mean, I suffered through just the smog impacts of the recent fires, and probably most of you did too. So you're all aware of what kind of costs there are.
Next question.
McKinley Addy with ATRA. So I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this question, but I'll ask it in a way. The Los Angeles Times reports that in the 2014 to 2017 timeframe, 2,000 fires could be sourced to utility infrastructure sources. If all of the mitigation and technology solutions that you've talked about were implemented, can you give us a sense of what fraction of these types of fires could potentially be reduced in the future?
I don't think we have any way of actually estimating that, do you?
Not explicitly, but I think when we look at the historical data, depending on the time frame, whether it's the last 10 years or the last 5 years, I think according to CAL FIRE, roughly between 5 and 10% of ignition causes were associated with electrical power. For the fires that we know within kind of Edison as being associated with our infrastructure, more than half of those are these contact from object type ignitions, another quarter associated with equipment failure. So we believe that the deployment of, say, covered conductor and some of these other infrastructure hardening in conjunction with a lot of the other operational practices should reduce the number of ignitions significantly. But the ignitions really depends on a lot of factors. You know, seasonal variations from year to year, size of the fires is driven a lot by the weather conditions and the fuel at the time. So I think in aggregate, we should see a decline over time, but it's hard, much like climate, from year to year, weather fluctuates up and down, but you should see a trend downward.
I'm going to agree, and we're starting to see the trend downward after some of the investment that's been made, and that's even despite not every year is created equally. Years with very long fire seasons and very little rain would be very different than other years, but I mean, when you look at a place like San Diego, something as simple as a Mylar balloon can be responsible for such a large percentage. And I think we'll see that reflected in the data statewide. So steps that can be taken with things against like Mylar, which are such a threat to the infrastructure, are small things that we can do that can make a really big difference.
Okay, next question.
So I have a question. I'm just wondering whether those long transmission lines designed to connect those remote communities will be at higher risk for fire. So I'm just wondering whether we can fundamentally think about new ways of transmitting those power to those communities. For example, can microgrid that is self-sufficient can play a potential role in this area to avoid fire? I understand we're talking about existing technology to better monitor and detect it, but I'm just wondering whether there's new way of thinking for fire prevention. Thanks.
So Brian, Brian D'Agostino, if you want to talk a little about Borrego Springs as an opportunity.
Yeah, it was exactly what I was thinking of at that point. An example of that in the SDG&E service territory is the Borrego Springs microgrid. And it is actually out in a desert community, not necessarily prone to wildfire, but prone to flash flooding and other extreme weather events. And there have been instances where the transmission system has been damaged, and we have been able to use the microgrid as a mechanism to minimize the impact on that community by keeping critical infrastructure energized, such as cool zones and other things which are especially important in climates with temperatures up to 120 degrees. So I think that is an example that we've looked at. We've deployed it on a smaller scale right now to mitigate the impacts of proactive de-energization when we try to really prevent the distribution system and parts of the transmission system from igniting a fire. If we de-energize, the system will open right now small, we call them community resource centers, and we're going to continue to expand that and look at, because in some cases, small microgrids, not larger scale, but starting small and focused, could help mitigate these climate impacts on our customers.
And so, Mike, hold on. Gotta have the microphone.
So generally, does electricity utility view microgrid as an opportunity or a threat from a business model perspective?
Well, I think utility in general is fairly indifferent as long as the customers are getting reliable service. But the application of the technology needs to be appropriate, I think, for the issue you're trying to solve. So I think to what Brian had talked about, if the issue is these infrequent events that you need resiliency for, then it may not make sense to have a lot of infrastructure built for something that happens maybe once a year. One of the things we're looking at are maybe plug-and-play type connectors, where if there is an event affecting an area, that some of these resilient centers can have portable generators or batteries dispatched and connected very quickly because you have kind of a USB connector but you don't have to make the investment to have that infrastructure there all the time. And that's where the situational awareness comes into play, where if we know 3, 5, 7 days in advance where these areas are, then you can pre-deploy those resources. So it's really about, I think, cost efficiency and applicability of the technology.
I'll add to that by saying we focused this panel mostly on the weather and kind of the line-tied devices. We could have a whole nother session just on resilient communities and the way to look at that. Not enough time to cover all of that in one topic, but there is a fair amount of research that Energy Commission and the utilities have funded in looking at things like microgrids, battery storage, grid tied and behind the meter. And so that could be, like I said, a topic of much greater discussion. And in fact, I think one of our recipients is here who's Port of Long Beach, who is actually testing out a mobile storage device and looking at how they can utilize that in a way to provide emergency power for particular needs on the port in the case of a grid outage. So there's a lot of activity going on in this area, and we could, like I said, have a whole other session on that, but maybe that's for next year. So next question.
Hi.
Oh, we're back over here.
I'm Dr. Josiah Johnston, freelance researcher. I was wondering if any of you are coordinating with other agencies on landscape-wide fuel treatments and ecosystem and forest restoration to reduce the overall fire risks, because that would have implications on overall carbon budget and maybe some carbon trading schemes.
Yes, as part of SDG&E's wildfire mitigation plan, we do kind of talk about our new and expanding fuel management program, which I think touches onto that.
And at Edison, we have kind of annual partnerships where we work with fire agencies and forest management groups to also do inspections before fire season, as well as to manage the fuel in terms of controlled burns. We have forest operations up in our Camp Edison area, so I think there's a lot of still opportunity for expanded partnership there.
You probably have time for one or two more questions.
Hi, Rafael Silverblatt with Kearns and West. I read with great interest about Governor Newsom's executive order to create a sprint procurement process and use CAL FIRE kind of as the demo for that procurement process. I was wondering if you could comment on whether you'll be participating and what the relationship will be with EPIC funding and how that's all going to go down.
Well, it's relatively new. I think we welcome the governor's desire to speed the implementation of new technology. I think in this space, every year there seems to be some new emergent technology, and I think to the degree that utilities can have a mechanism that's very flexible to adjust and quickly demonstrate or pilot new technologies to see what their potential is, I think that would serve everybody in terms of being able to onboard some of these technologies. It's not as simple, I think, as most would think in terms of just getting something from a manufacturer and plugging it into the grid. There's a lot of testing that has to take place to make sure things communicate properly. There's a lot of cybersecurity issues. And then just the ensuring that the device does what it says it's going to do on the packaging, if you will. So I think all the utilities have test facilities that we can actually install and make sure these devices are doing what they say they're going to do.
Okay. Next question.
Liang Lawrence, Livermore Lab. The question to the first speaker, Dr. Larry Dell, regarding your infrastructure impact analysis. So the grid is designed on the N-1 and even N-1-1 scenarios. And also we have the remedial action scheme deployed at utilities. So for your impact analysis study, you just look into, we have a fire in this area, then transmission line will go down, or you also look into, hey, if this line down, we have an overloading issue in another line, we have overvoltage issue in another area, and what the protection scheme operates in the system, and what's impact on the system-wide. Just want to clarify the impact study you did.
Yeah, I only heard part of the question, I think, but let me know if I answer it. Essentially, what we did was look at incidents where fires approached or actually burned transmission lines. And then we tabulated all of those incidences across the whole state for our sample, and then worked with CalISO to figure out what happened when the fires came up next to a transmission line. And lots of things happened. And that table that's included in the PowerPoint summarized it, but there's a lot more detail in the report about the actual events. Much of the time, nothing happened. Fire comes up against a transmission line out in the middle of nowhere, and things go on as usual. The CalISO just pays a lot of attention to it to make sure that it will remain okay. Some of the time, though, you do get changes to the system. The simplest thing is they may just reroute the source of generation so that the line affected by the fire isn't, if something happens to it, it's not going to impact the system as much. So that raises costs a little bit. You go to a higher cost source of generation, but that may be the only impact. But then finally, there are places where the grid is really important. Particularly one of the places we showed where in the northern part of the state, if those lines are impacted, that may not just have an impact on the source of generation, but it can destabilize the whole western grid. You could have massive blackouts as a sort of upper limit on the kind of impacts. So in those cases, there's a lot of energy and a lot of work that CalISO has to do to make sure that they avoid those kind of impacts, but they can't always do it. So sometimes you get pretty big outages and you have fairly large costs. But so far, that's been a fairly limited set of incidences, but nobody quite knows about the future.
Well, I don't know whether the light going out was an accident or it's an indication we're out of time, but we are out of time. So exactly, that's their subtle way of telling us we're going over. But I want to thank the panel here for what I thought was a very interesting discussion today. Larry, for your work with us in looking forward, and both of our utility representatives who have been collaborating with us on current and future research. I want to thank all of you for your insights and everyone here for joining in today. It was a good conversation. I do want to say that if you are interested in this topic, the Public Utility Commission is also having a Wildfire Technology Summit in March. I think it's the 20th and 21st.
So welcome. This panel is about local clean energy solutions at the municipal scale. I'm Max Gomberg. I manage climate change and a number of other portfolios at the Water Resources Control Board, and I'm going to moderate today. You may be wondering, why is there a water person here? Well, part of the reason for that is because we know that to really transform our society, our economy, and to move towards a sustainable future, we need solutions at all different scales, very large scale, mid-scale, even household scale solutions when it comes to a clean energy future, reducing our carbon emissions, and being resilient to climate change that we're already experiencing in the state. And our presenters today have experience both in the research sector, in the business sector, in the private sector, and then running facilities, wastewater facilities, which I think of sort of as middle in the scale. It's not huge infrastructure, but it's not small infrastructure either. And these facilities are part of our urban fabric. They're critical public services, and they also manage water and wastewater, which is a critical component of our society as well as our cities. And what's more, they have a lot of infrastructure, whether it's water treatment, whether it's wastewater treatment. There's a lot of infrastructure involved. There's a lot of investment into that infrastructure that's been made, that will be made in the years to come. And how those investments play out will really determine how successful we are at both integrating the energy efficiency and clean energy generation goals into our water and wastewater operations, as well as how well that infrastructure is responding to climate change, whether it's flood events, whether it's sea level rise, or whether it's extended droughts. And we have already experienced all of that in California, and we'll have more of that as time goes on. So I'm not going to take too much longer. I just want to briefly tell you who our panelists are, and then they're each going to give you their perspective on the work they're doing. We'll have a couple of Q&A questions from me, and then we'll open it up to the audience after that. So I'm not going to give detailed bios. I'm just going to tell you who our presenters are and their affiliation, and they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves. So our first speaker today is Hannah, I'm going to mispronounce it, Brunig, who's a research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. We also have Tom Gratz, who's U.S. Sales Manager at HCI. Logan Olds, who's the General Manager of the Victor Valley Wastewater Reclamation Authority. Dr. Sebastian Tillmans, who's the Director of Operations at the Codiga Recovery Center at Stanford University, and Mark McDaniel with the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts. So you're going to hear some different perspectives today from researchers, again, the private sector, the public sector, about all of the interlocking aspects of water energy nexus and the way that our water and wastewater facilities are participating in the transformation that we're trying to achieve here in California. So with that, I'm going to ask Hannah to come up and present.
Hi, my name is Hannah Brunig, and I'm speaking on behalf of the team at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, led by Corinne Scown and Alistair Robinson, who are the co-PIs. And Corinne went into labor yesterday, so we're going to get a new member to the team very soon here. We have a number of partners here, including PepsiCo and other groups who have given us some really interesting data for this project. So this CEC EPIC project is titled Advancing Cleaner, Less Costly, More Reliable Distributed Generation to Enable Customer Solutions and Zero Net Energy Communities. So really the idea for this project is to research and match locally available waste residues with the state's demand for power and with low-grade heat. And our goal is to identify locations where this can be done efficiently and sustainably, particularly for distributed generation and district energy systems. You can think of those as hot water and chilled water systems among buildings. And I think some of the most exciting things coming out of this are the data sets that we've developed on this resource. In this picture, it shows in green ag waste, in brown manure and other CAFO waste streams, in blue food processors, and in black municipal sources. And so we've really built off a lot of the work coming from UC Davis to now go to the sub-annual and sub-county level. And from there, we've then created some really interesting life cycle assessment and techno-economic tools that can look at how to site the development of anaerobic digestion and gasification, either using existing infrastructure or building new infrastructure in a way that is highly likely to be profitable, but also really ensure low greenhouse gas emissions, particularly the short-lived climate pollutants like methane, and the community benefits. So I'll go over a few results in this quick talk. So we break things into high moisture solids, use about 50% moisture content, and low moisture solids, and these plots show Northern Valley Desert on the top, South Central Coast and State Other on the bottom. And you can see right away that there's just a dominant amount of manure in the Northern Valley, and in other areas it's dominated more by municipal waste, especially the South Central Coast. And surprisingly, for the high moisture solids, you're not seeing a lot of seasonality that we often talk about, this fear of seasonality. And so there's some interesting things where you can have a pretty reliable blend of waste streams on the high moisture solid side. Then for the low moisture solid side, it's a different story where on the top in the northern valley you see huge fluctuations in these seasonal residues, things like orchard or vineyard waste, tomato waste is very dominant from the processors. On the lower hand side you see the forestry residues are just going to take over, and we've heard a lot about the need for managing forest residues and how you manage these different feedstocks in one location and manage the blends and storage is really important for siting a facility and reducing your risks from an operation perspective. But the other important thing is to say, well, what would be the alternative? What are my tipping fees? But also, what are the air emissions coming from these systems? And that's all not always straightforward. It can be very farm specific. So we try and look at a range of scenarios of what would have happened prior to developing, let's say, a gasifier or anaerobic digester. So in addition to these data sets, it was very important to us to make this data available. So in addition to the journal articles that we publish, we've developed a biositing tool, and the bottom is the link that's becoming active with all the data sets out of this, as well as our upcoming life cycle assessment emissions on greenhouse gas and costs from our techno-economic analysis. And so this little screenshot, it's really fun. So you have the state, and you can drop a pin and say, hey, I want to build something here. What's the resource around this point? And what would you suggest I build? So it'll look at dry AD, wet AD, gasifiers. It'll say, actually, there's a wastewater treatment facility there already, so maybe you should use that capacity. And here's the amount of capacity. So this is a very exciting tool for us, and we're hoping to couple it with other things coming out of CEC projects we're leading. One really funny one is Smelly. So it's an odor dispersion web tool, which is supposed to identify what the odor effects would be from building an anaerobic digester. And it's very interesting. You can see in the bottom corner, you can have the exact same emissions coming from a facility, but due to the way the wind's blowing and other things, you could build it right in San Francisco with very little impact because of the offshore winds. Versus San Jose, you're looking at some really large spread. So these are just some of the capabilities, and I'm happy to answer questions if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So just one thing to note, and at the outset, right, part of our challenge as a state is not only the carbon dioxide emissions, but of course the methane emissions and other short-lived climate pollutants. And projects like these are really helping us get a handle on those. So I just wanted to put that in context here. So next is going to be Sebastian, who's going to talk about his work.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sebastian Tillmans. I'm now the Executive Director of the Cotega Resource Recovery Center at Stanford University. We're a facility dedicated to helping accelerate the commercialization and adoption of new resource recovery technologies from waste, and we really focus on wastewater. So I'll present without slides. So our facility is dedicated to helping accelerate the commercialization of new resource recovery technologies. But what I'm here to talk to you about today is what I would call one of the most promising technologies coming out of that research, and a partnership that we developed with California Energy Commission and with Silicon Valley Clean Water, a wastewater treatment agency in the San Francisco Bay Area, to prove out one of these technologies. And the technology in particular is to eliminate aeration from the wastewater treatment process. So wastewater treatment plants, as Max mentioned, are not necessarily an enormous load if you look at it in percentage on the statewide or nationwide, but if you look at any given city, a wastewater treatment plant can be a pretty substantial load on the local grid. For example, I used to work at oceanside wastewater treatment plant in San Francisco, and that serves about 20% of the city's needs, and the power consumption of that plant is on the order of 1.5 to 2 megawatts of continuous power. Now, about half of that, 30 to 50% of that power consumption is driven by one process, which is essentially aerating the wastewater to treat the organic contamination in the water. We are working on a process that eliminates that aeration from the wastewater treatment process and replaces it with anaerobic treatment. Now, a number of my co-panelists have been working on anaerobic treatment of the solids. This is an anaerobic treatment system to deal with the organic contamination in the liquids. So Dr. Bruni was just talking about high moisture. I'm talking about, say, 99.9% moisture or more, and really getting at that last little fraction of organics in the water and harvesting it to convert it to methane gas, which can then be used to produce energy. Unfortunately, without slides, it's very hard for me to explain to you how it works. But it's in a simple process. It's a two-stage process. One stage is called a fluidized bed reactor, and it relies on a biofilm, a way to essentially create layers of slime around these grains of granular activated carbon. And that slime is actually how we are able to keep those organisms in the reactor. And then the second stage is a membrane tank, which allows for separation of those fine particulate solids, retaining them in the reactor long enough for them to get biodegraded by the microbes. The purpose of this project is to demonstrate this technology on municipal wastewater at Silicon Valley Clean Water, demonstrate its energy efficiency for secondary treatment, which would be the quality of water you need to achieve in order to be able to discharge the water to a receiving water body. But we want to go beyond that, and we're actually going to show that how this technology can fit into integrated treatment processes to provide non-potable water for non-potable reuse, but also water for potable water reuse, and demonstrate how that full process train would look, hopefully in demonstrating at each stage better energy efficiency, lower energy consumption than a traditional aerobic-based wastewater treatment process and water reuse process.
Okay, thanks. Tom?
Hi there, Tom Gratz with Hitachi Zosen Innova. I'm going to be telling you about a commercial scale anaerobic digestion facility that we recently commissioned in San Luis Obispo. Was also a facility obviously funded by the EPIC grant system. We were fortunate enough to receive that. And what we are going to do here, or what we are doing there, is we are taking organic waste, namely green bin material from source-separated organic collection from the residential sector, and we are subjecting it to anaerobic digestion and ultimately produce renewable energy in form of electricity that is going to be fed into the local PG&E grid. Just a couple of key data of the facility. It's a high solids anaerobic digestion facility. And some of you that are familiar with anaerobic digestion projects might have heard about the San Jose facility. There was one talk earlier today about that. The San Jose facility is a batch type system. What the Hitachi Campo gas system is a continuously fed system. And the project type is a finance, design, build, own, operate. So in order for Hitachi Zosen to employ their first anaerobic digestion system in North America, we decided to finance, design, build, own, and operate this facility ourselves. And it was about a $25 million price tag, and that's all in, including permitting, soft cost, you name it. So that's complete turnkey system. And as I mentioned, we received a couple of grants, one from California Energy Commission EPIC program, and then the Cal Recycle Bank as well. And because we're making renewable electricity, we qualified for the investment tax credit program that was available at the time. And the caveat there was that you had to begin construction prior to December 31st, 2016. We literally started construction December 8th, 2016. So we're just able to grandfather ourselves in there, which was a 30% tax incentive program. The technology is a CompoGas high solids. Our client is more or less the local waste hauler, which happens to be Waste Connections. And the property that the facility is sited on is also owned by the local waste hauler. And besides the renewable energy, we're also producing a compost, which will be used in local agriculture. San Luis Obispo, where the facility is located, as you well know, is wine country. So there's plenty of vineyards and avocado trees and such where we can have a beneficial use for this digestate. This is a real brief process schematic from left to right. You have your waste receiving area. You have a high solids anaerobic digestion vessel. The facility operates continuously 24 hours a day. It is not staffed in the evenings and on long weekends. It is automatically fed by an automated crane. So waste receiving is taking place during regular business hours, and then after the receiving hours are done with, the facility feeds itself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then on the back end, we are taking the biogas, the medium BTU gas, and burn it in a CHP, combined heat and power unit, that burns a generator and then produces electricity, as well as hot water, which we use internally for our digestion heating process, and keep the bugs in the anaerobic digestion system happy. These are just some pictures here. We started construction, or we completed major construction, I'm sorry, in July of 2018. We have been through the cold and hot commissioning process, and starting up an anaerobic digestion facility is not like flipping a switch and the thing's on. It's a long and tedious process because essentially it's a metal stomach that you have to fill with bacteria, train the bacteria to operating temperature, and then slowly but surely feed a recipe for the bacteria to digest. And it's about a 3 to 4 months process. And we have been online officially since December of 2018. This is a picture of the facility as it stands, I don't know, as of a month ago or so. This big silver thing is the actual working vessel. That's the anaerobic digester. It's about 100 foot long and 25 foot in diameter. So this is not a pilot facility. This is a full-scale facility, and actually one of the smaller ones for us, with only about 36,000 tons per year capacity. We have built facilities as large as 300,000 tons per year capacity. So with that, my time is up. I thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
How many people out there enjoyed the cookies in today's meal as much as I did? Show of hands. Yeah, those were pretty darn good, weren't they? All right, my name's Logan. I'm the general manager for Victor Valley Wastewater Reclamation Authority. When I was told that I could put up 2 or 3 slides on something I've worked on for 12 years, I simply gave up. I mean, what 2 or 3 slides could I say that could envelop the odyssey that we've experienced? So let me tell you a story. Let me give you a little bit of background. My utility serves predominantly disadvantaged communities. It's located in what we call the high desert, Victorville, Apple Valley, Hesperia, 2 county service areas. If you know Barstow, you're about 45 minutes away from us. We're the last major community between Vegas and the Inland Empire. So we process about 10.5 million gallons a day of wastewater. We discharge to what's called a closed basin. So most utilities are able to discharge to a river, which eventually reaches a lake or a stream or something like that that goes to the ocean. We discharge to a closed basin, so who knows the Baker thermometer? In Baker, okay, a few of you do. That's our ultimate discharge point. So anything deposited in our watershed stays in our watershed. As I mentioned, we're a small utility. I've got 33 staff, and because of the way that we discharge and where we discharge to, 100% of the water is recycled water, Title 22 quality. This leads to a number of issues. The facilities had been underinvested in for decades, so basically it was used up, it was old. So in 2006, we were facing a capital program over $220 million for our community just to meet basic water quality issues. So how much money do you think we had to focus on energy and energy issues? Zero. Exactly. Zero. So in order to address this issue, because by then AB 32 had been passed, right, so we all were aware of the scare about what that was going to do to our utility bills at that time. In addition to, for us, the California Toxic Rule had been passed. We needed to switch to ultraviolet disinfection. All of these were telling me that our energy costs were going to go up 30 to 50% at our small utility. That is our biggest expense, power, after personnel costs. So facing this with zero money, a 50% increase in energy consumption, and a $220 million capital budget, why not just throw in the towel? Right? That's a pretty daunting task. Well, to be honest, it ticked me off because I'd look outside my office window and we have a flare that was there to design to burn off all the methane. And what killed me was here we have all of these costs, but yet we're flaring methane. Why should I be spending over $400,000 a year on natural gas when I have a flare? That's where the inception of our program began. So what's been interesting about this, oh, come on, 2 minutes? Jeez, 40 minutes. We started this pathway, and we've reduced our energy consumption by 40%. We went from producing 115 million cubic feet of biogas on an annual basis to this last year over 280 million cubic feet, and that's by focusing on fog, fats, oils, and grease, and anaerobically digestible material. We have two 800-kilowatt biogas engines that power our facility, currently providing a little over 70% of our power. In the first year of operation, our engines saved us almost, it was $249,371. First year of operation. It's actually the only project that I'm familiar with that created that type of benefit. We are now moving forward with an advanced microgrid. I say advanced because we're looking at an entire power management solution for our facility in conjunction with flow cell batteries. Not a big fan of lithium ion. They don't last very long and they catch on fire. So flow cell batteries will give me 20-year warranty. They don't catch fire, lower operations and maintenance costs over the term, so better return on investment for my constituents. We're also pursuing net energy metering. So my goal is to have that completed this fall, which means we should actually be off the grid. And let me tell you, if my small utility in the middle of the desert, with the difficulties that we have with our permit, can accomplish this task, I don't see any reason why other facilities throughout California and the nation cannot. In addition to this, because we're producing so much gas, I'm going to hopefully tomorrow be reviewing the final agreement where we're going to be doing an injection project. So we're going to take that extra biogas, over 150 million cubic feet that we produce annually, and inject it into the pipeline. Hopefully that'll be online sometime early in 2020. Big fan of how did I do it? With a great team and P3s, as well as performance-based contracting. Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing something. Guest, do I need to mess around this?
Mark and I are frequently called to present at the same time, so I did this just a minute.
Basically the county, except for the city of Los Angeles, we have about 25 separate districts, basically set up around sewage flow sheds, adjacent cities, about 85 member cities. Still seeing that. So if you have good eyes, you can see them. Just some energy numbers. We have 12 major wastewater treatment plants, a number of pumping stations, all told about 150 to 200 separate electric meters. Our total demand is about 35 megawatts, and we generate 20 megawatts from digester gas at our largest wastewater treatment plant. On the solid waste side, we operate 2 active landfills and maintain 4 closed landfills, and we have 2 plants that generate about 30 megawatts from landfill gas. That is not my presentation, but we're close. There, I'm the middle one. Mark it down.
No, the presenter. You need to make the computer.
Okay. So I've covered the first slide already. This is, what I'm talking about is a program we've taken from research to commercialization. This was not an EPIC-funded research program, but we did get a big bunch of money at the end that I'll cover. So in that we're in the solid waste and wastewater business, one potential technology was, can we take food waste, divert it from landfills where it sits for 30 to 50 years, turns into methane, even though we'll collect 90 to 95% of that methane, a major greenhouse gas source in the state. Can we take that to our wastewater treatment plants where we're already digesting sludge, where it's completely controlled, we digest it in 2 or 3 weeks, there's no leaks. So we started some basic research in 2011, 2012. We have a wastewater research group. On the left is a little vial of ground up food waste. Looks kind of like if you let it sit in your stomach for a few hours. On the right, our research group has a 10-liter flask that simulates our 4 million gallon digester. So they did basically the basic science. Will the reactions work? How much gas can we get? This is a room full of scientists and engineers, so I got to show a curve. So the green one on the top is as we added food waste at our optimal rate, we got about twice as much methane for adding 10% on a volumetric basis, about 30% on a solids basis. So we knew the reaction worked, and we knew how much extra digester gas that we could get from the process. Demonstration commercialization phases. So now we know it works. Now we're looking to make sure that it works at a full scale. And there's 3 steps. First, we've got to get the stuff ready to put in a digester. And you might think a digester full of sewage sludge, you could throw garbage in it. You can't. It needs to be relatively clean stuff. You don't want to throw contamination in there. So we got to clean it up. We put it in the digester. We get the digester gas and what to do with the digester gas. So those are the 3 key phases. We teamed with, let me go, I'm sorry, one step ahead of me. So this is a pre-processing facility. We get the stuff on the left, and that's actually the clean food waste. That's from a grocery store, food waste processors, large restaurant chains, Angel Stadium, UC Irvine, sources that are large enough where it pays to separate out the food waste. and we take it to our material recovery facility, and we grind it up and clean it up, and that's looking down into the top of the tanker, and that's what we'll truck down to our wastewater treatment plant. At the treatment plant, we did a full-scale demonstration test. So each of these digesters you're looking at are about 3.6 million gallons. The sludge stays in there for 15 to 18 days, and during that time, before we added the food waste, the sludge, you eat up about half of it in there, and the bacteria in the digester basically outcompete all of the other pathogens. So what you come out with, it's smelly and it's nasty, but it's actually safe to make compost out of or directly put onto a field. So for 4 years, we put food waste into digester 16 on the end, got data from the control digester. Turned out the full scale matched the lab work exactly. It wasn't trouble-free at the treatment plant, but they knew what the challenges were. They were able to address them. They know what it'll cost in the full term. So we're moving into commercialization right now, and this is the energy side of it. We have an existing power plant that uses all the methane that doesn't have more capacity, so we're going to make vehicle fuel, and this is where I received about a $2.4 million grant from the CEC to do that. Commercial technology from a firm called BioCNG will basically take this gas, which is 60% methane, 40% CO2, wet, hydrogen sulfide, a lot of contaminants, clean it up to vehicle-grade compressed natural gas. If you're familiar, putting it in the gas company pipeline is an extra $5 million for the first molecule, where we have a fueling station on site, so we're going to bypass that and clean it up and put it directly into vehicles. And that should be starting up by the middle of next year. And again, thanks to the CEC for helping us fund that project.
Thanks, all. So I'm going to open it up to audience Q&A in a minute here, but first I want to ask the panelists a question, sort of taking something you said, Logan, as a jumping-off point, which is, you know, if we can do it, given that you serve a disadvantaged community, small system, you know, what's it take? And this is always the question, right? How do you take a really successful project that's funded and scale it up? How do you overcome those obstacles, whether they're financing, logistics, or regulation, or otherwise? So that's really the question to all of you about the various projects. How do you look to scale these? What would it take to overcome any obstacles that are out there, and really have these solutions be more widespread, whether it's digestion of food waste or digestion simply of municipal sewage? So I don't know who wants to take that first. Maybe Logan, I'll pass that to you since you brought it up.
All right. Can you all hear me? Does this work? Okay. So when you're working with disadvantaged communities, these are folks who are more concerned about putting gas in the fuel tank, actually paying the utility bill, or having a job or getting to work. So the types of issues that we work on really don't have much impact to them. So one of the first issues you have to identify is, how do you resolve or impart to a disadvantaged community that what you are attempting to do is meaningful? So if you can get at least a proportion of their interest invested in what you are attempting to do, then your first hurdle is much easier. So that's the first thing, is it meaningful to them? Then what I do is I develop a risk profile. So we're all accustomed to the standard triangle, right, where you have time, money, and quality of the construction project. So what I've done is I've created a risk profile that includes the political risk, the operations and maintenance risk, and the financial risk. Depending upon the nature of the project, it will sway kind of which area needs to be addressed, and that gives you a guideline on how we go about resolving whether the technical issues are there to address the project. And finally, everything comes down to money. So return on investment. If I can't show an ROI of no longer than 7 years, and preferably between 3 to 5 years for the project, it's pretty much a no-go.
Anyone else? Mark?
Again, for us, we're a little different politically than Logan, in that we're 5 million people, 80
But again, it's the same challenge in that our citizens don't see this stuff unless they come to our state fair or one of our tours. We get approached with research ideas. I'll tell you, my first screening thing is, does it pass philosophy? And you'd be surprised, probably 50 to 80% of the ideas don't. The second one is, does the person approaching me know how hard it is? There's an old cartoon of like, you ever seen it? It's got this huge math equation, that then a miracle occurs, and then there's another part of the equation. I get a lot of that where it's like, oh, and then we'll just convert this into diesel oil. You know, it's an oil refinery. Those are this project is kind of unusual in that we have a wastewater research group. So we get pitched a lot of ideas, and even though somebody says you can try it for free, well, you know, it takes our staff time. So they're screening for the best ideas. So in this case, waste management was already processing the food waste. They were looking for partners, and the research worked, and we gave them a 4 million gallon digester for 4 years. Already, again, you know, number one is public health, number two is compliance. Converting waste into resources is part of our mission. But every project, again, we have out of our 88 cities, probably half of them are disadvantaged communities or not, like a city government that might set a zero waste goal and put taxpayer money into that. So again, these projects have to meet compliance and pay for themselves, and that's what this project is.
Yeah, so I just want to see if any of the other panelists want to chime in first.
Yeah, can everybody hear me? Yeah. What it takes to make this project successful is a couple of things. Legislation is one of them, and the willingness of people to participate. We simply cannot bury our trash in the ground, in a hole in the ground anymore. I don't care how efficient it is to extract whatever amount of gas we can extract out of a landfill. It's not an efficient method. It's not sustainable. And in order to make these projects work, we as a society need to rethink how we're doing things. We need to reuse and bring these materials, their energy sources, basically, that we are not using right now. And there's technologies around that have been proven, that are not nascent, that have been around for 25 plus years on large scale, that we can implement tomorrow here in the United States. It's just a matter of helping have legislation that helps out with that, and then have outfits like the CEC, for instance, to help fund these projects, because there is not enough incentives yet for renewable energy, and that's what makes these projects fly.
Right, so I think there was some hands up. So yeah, let me go here and then there.
Thank you. No, I don't have to yell. Alex Lansper, San Francisco Electrical Construction Industry. Completely far afield from what I do day to day. You said you're looking for an ROI or a payback of 3 to 5 and maybe below 7 years. I guess the question that I have is, a public agency, you have incredibly low cost of capital. You have low timing risk. You don't have to cash out for anyone. You obviously have service demands that you need to meet. But why are you requiring such high rates of return when you're an ongoing operation without having to have those profit imperatives?
That's an excellent question, and the politics of what I do is the response. The primary motive of our organizations is to protect public health and the environment through focusing on water quality. So traditionally, when you talk to the communities and the politicians, they often ask me, well, why are you interested in energy? They don't understand necessarily the water-energy nexus, in that everything we do with water requires massive amounts of energy. So in order to essentially pitch or sell them the concept, it has to have a near-term benefit for the community, and this gets into the area where it's a disadvantage. Also, you talked about the low cost of capital, but I started off telling you that we've built $220 million of infrastructure for my community in the last 12 years. That left 0 funds. So the only way to make these energy projects work is through partnering with private industry. So the public-private partnerships, they're looking for a high rate of return in order for me to sell or pitch it to the communities that I represent. I'm looking for a financial incentive that solves a meaningful problem that we have at the facility. So in order to achieve those dual needs, I have to look at pretty much 1 or 2 election cycles for there to be a benefit, and even then there are still the questions that are asked.
I just wanted to add to what Logan said about how these operators don't have enough time to think about energy issues. And I've found that on the sources of biomass as well as the energy generators is that they don't have time. So even if on paper you might make a profit, there's this transition and investment and risk period that's like, it needs to be a much larger than just like a plus sign to make a real movement in some of these operations. And so the decision to switch over, I found, sometimes comes to having this momentum come from, let's say, an almond board or the dairy industry representatives or an organization that can vouch that there's some security in making this transition, rather than just one startup company trying to prove a case. There needs to be a larger demonstration, I think, to really make this take off.
Another question in the back, and then we'll come here.
Yeah, there's a question for Mark. Just out of curiosity, what additional benefit did you get from mixing it? How much improved biogas production?
So what we saw in the demonstration was the same as in the lab scale work. So at the optimal rate, in the bench scale work, we added different rates of food waste and found at about 30% food waste on a solids basis. We still had a steady reaction. Above that, we started disrupting germs. And we got about double the methane at that rate. And we saw no impact on the biosolids because the stuff we're adding is pretty much completely digestible.
Okay, so no impact.
No impact on biosolids.
We're running 10% more, and we went from 115 million cubic feet on an annual basis to 280 million cubic feet on an annual basis. Numbers.
Question up here.
We're talking about the difficulty of getting the financial resources. Does the state have any incentive programs that help get us past that barrier?
So I'll start and turn it over to anyone else who wants to talk about that. The state has various funding mechanisms depending on, we put our funding mechanisms into different boxes, right? So our broadest base funding mechanism in this space is the cap and trade program, which provides money, for example, through our state recycling agency for various waste reduction methods to comply with legislation that says we can't keep sending the waste to the landfills. And then we have other funding sources depending on what sector we're talking about. So in the water sector, we have revolving loan programs that help finance wastewater infrastructure. And then in the waste sector, there have been some grant programs over the years. So there are funding programs that the state runs. I wouldn't say it's an integrated or comprehensive set of funding programs in what I'll term sort of the waste to energy sector here we're talking about, but there's also some federal money, but it's been pretty limited in recent years.
Yeah, again, there's a number of grants for wastewater treatment plant. There's a state revolving fund that you have money available at like 1 or 2% interest rate. The CEC grant I mentioned helped us to build our program for converting the digested gas to biogas. There's another one that actually I was on a plane with my boss today. He was at their board meeting, CAEFTEA. Did I get those letters right? It's a sales tax exemption on a project like this. You know, for renewable energy, clean energy projects, you can save $1 million by applying for and getting the sales tax exemption. There's, for electricity, there's a biomat tariff, which the utilities are reluctantly implementing, but that gives you a guaranteed electricity stream, probably double what the market rate for renewable power is right now, so that's another state support that's out there.
I think the best program that we've been able to participate in is the CEC's EPIC grant program. It provided the most flexibility. One of the issues we have as public agencies is the fact that if we take state funds or certain federal funds, we have to go out to bid, right? That means we have to compare projects, go with least responsive or least cost responsive bidder, and that puts a lot of limitations. So the way that we've implemented our projects is basically through a variation of design build. Think of CM at risk. So when you do these types of projects through a P3, what you're actually able to do is shift the construction risk to a performance-based and then get the technology that you've actually already vetted. That way you ensure that you get what you want. Just a couple other programs. Southern California Edison has on-bill financing, 0% loan funds. We've done that as well as all of the other programs that have been mentioned here. But kind of a fun game. Where do you find the right funding mix for the type of project?
We had a question here, and then we'll go here and then there.
Hi, so this is primarily for Logan. The narrative I've often heard is that small communities and disadvantaged communities really struggle to have the staff, technical capacity, and the time resources at these utilities to both apply for funding and then complete the project and continue to see it through. Is that something you experience, and do you have any recommendations for those?
I only come up with the idea. It's the only reason we've been successful is I have an amazing, fantastic team. We talk about risk. We talk about creativity. There's a very hands-on culture at my utility that's taken many, many years to cultivate by empowering my staff, by delegating my authority to them, by ensuring that at every level of the organization they understand the goal of what we're doing, how we are attempting to do it, and how each of us plays a crucial role in its eventual implementation or its failure. So they have an equal voice in saying, will this work, will this not work, and we go through that type of process. We have failed. Like Mark, we get a number of crackpots that have come in and suggested a number of technologies, and we vet those and go through them. But I completely give all the credit to the amazing staff that I have. As smaller agencies, we looked at microturbines, we looked at fuel cells, all of those other technologies. We eventually settled on internal combustion engines that meet the South MD NOx and VOC emission standards based on the selective catalytic converter technologies, primarily because with the transition to this, my engine guys were going to lose two of our main engines, and I already had trained staff that knew how to operate and maintain engines. So when I looked at various technologies and then would discuss them with my staff, we would look at what our internal capabilities are and then what type of service agreements we could arrange through the technology supplier to mitigate the operations and maintenance risk. So absolutely, that is a significant issue, but there's no, what's that saying? There's no I in team or something like that.
Okay, there's a question there.
Hi, I just had a statement more so for the incentives. If you Google the Business Incentive Guide, BIG, it's a state of California OPIS. It's put together incentive guide that includes the case data, California Beach tax credit, and multiple other sales and use tax as well as energy efficient loans. It may not be comprehensive, but it does have a lot of the information in one space. The Business Investment Guide, and if you Google GoBiz, it'll come up.
There was
Follow-up to the ROI question. So on average, what's the rate of capital?
So that depends on the nature of project and what their return on investment is. So to basically interest private capital, they're looking for somewhere between a 10 to 20% return on their investment. And that depends on the capital cost of the project. And then also, I usually like to work in a cost or revenue sharing agreement based on the risk of the project. So it's kind of a mix that depends. So we've done 5 P3s to help them implement our program, and each one of them has used a different mix. The one we're working on right now to do direct pipeline injection involves the EPA's Renewable Identification Number credits, right, and the low carbon fuel standard credits through California. I don't have the staff, right, to this young woman's question about do we have the technical capacity. We don't have the staff to be able to figure out what that's going to be down to the, I can't say that, the nth level, right, the NATS, right, NATS acid. And so the way we've worked the structure is essentially a revenue sharing agreement based on the value that's there in the portfolio for renewable natural gas on an annual year-over-year basis. So realistically, it just kind of depends. What I will say is that because we're small, bonds are not an option for us because you're dealing with fractions of a penny typically that matter over the lifespan. So what I try and do is cut out as many middlemen, bond insurance agents, bond counsel, all those people add cost to the nature of the project. So anytime you can find an alternative way around that, you can provide better value. But this is where the technology providers oftentimes kind of have a lot of difficulty, is that they're into the manufacturing and selling of their technology, and they try and do lease buyback arrangements or those types of things, or they try and pitch it so that, well, you'll go out and get the money and buy this from us because, like Mark said, it's the greatest thing in the world, right? And they fail to understand that even though we have access to low-cost money, I have to go through a very substantial political process and able to access that. And if I can do an off-balance sheet transaction where I'm trading one cost for another cost through a value-based arrangement, that's much more beneficial to my small utility in a disadvantaged community. But you have to be adroit enough in your planning, strategic enough in your analysis to be able to take advantage of those. The California Energy Commission grant that we received for our flow cell battery storage and advanced microgrid took 2.5 years of planning before we could get the team together and put that in and move forward.
So in many cases, you're looking for the basically on such a gating function for projects is because the cost of money is being borne by the private side? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see a question in the back.
Can you hear me? Hello? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, I think Logan mentioned something in regards to community resolution, and I was wondering how community resolution projects, specifically when we're talking about disadvantaged communities in Los Angeles, and I believe it was Apple Valley, or I couldn't hear the last part. So I was just wondering how community resolution projects, and if you all could give an explanation of the way that they are engaged.
Okay, this is my last question I'm going to answer, or attempt to. When I first told my elected officials of the issues and received kind of the blank stares and why is this important, I understood that I had a long way to go. What I didn't tell you is that our utility, before I came over, had 120 water quality violations within 6 months. It was operationally bankrupt, and we had failed as a business. So that was the environment that I walked in. So part of this was an attempt by me to change the narrative. How can we show the community, yes, we failed here, but we can accomplish something amazing over here? And it was also a way to transition my staff from basically a negative culture into a positive can-do culture. So there were internal and external pressures that were occurring during this time. And what I realized when I did not get the political support was I needed to go out and immediately start educating the community and discuss with them why this was important. So no longer was what had our utility been, but what could our utility be. So I spoke more towards the goal, the imagination, the creativity that was latent within the community, and talked to them with the numbers, seeing what the opportunities were with our underutilized infrastructure, how we could monetize that, how we could create new value-based chains at our utilities to obtain new revenues, offset expenses that would then offset the need to raise those rates. So I went on basically a 2-year speaking tour of I would talk to a room with 3 people in it, or I would talk to a room with upwards of 150 people in it. I came up with basic messages about where I wanted our facility to go and what it could be over the next 5 to 10 years.
and talk to them in very simple terms about the steps that were necessary. Understand, a utility that's 10.5 million gallons per day that has 33 employees is very, very different from one like Mark manages, where you've got 88 different cities and I've got 4 communities. So the bureaucracy and the dynamics are very different in what we can accomplish. And it's, again, coming up with simple messaging, and quite frankly, I have to tell you, I have the best job in the world. There is nothing better than sewage treatment. I don't care what you all do, but it's just fascinating, all the little different things that you get to play with. So being able to go out into the community and having opportunities like this to help talk about what a fantastic thing a treatment plant is and all of the nifty stuff you can do there, this is why I'll just shut up because I could go on for hours.
So I want to see if, Mark, you serve a lot of disadvantaged communities, and any of the other panelists to speak to this issue of community communications as well.
So, again, we serve all our communities. There's probably half our city. We range from Bell Gardens to Beverly Hills. So we've got a range. We have public outreach. We have an Earth Day festival. We have tours for local schools. One of the issues, teachers said, boy, what a great tour. I can't get money for that. We pay for the school buses. And again, in our local disadvantaged communities, and we probably have several tours a week. We work with Rio Hondo Community College for a training program for wastewater treatment plant operators. We have a shortage of skilled people, and these are good, well-paying union jobs that you'd be surprised we don't have people who have the skills to do that. So we work with the community colleges for the training. Our largest treatment plant is 300 million gallons a day. I assume one of the 10 largest in the country. We have a goal of 0 odors detected off-site, and we work for that. So those are the things that we do in our community.
Sure. Absolutely. Community is a big part of the whole equation. To pull off a successful project, we had to do the same thing. We had to do a lot of public outreach, and certain folks that did not understand or know the technology well thought we were going to build a methane bomb in their backyard. It's absolutely not the case. But it's like everything else. You need to do community outreach. We participated in a local food diversion program and actually sponsored a collection truck for that purpose. And we do a lot of public tours for university, Cal Poly and such, and we will continue to do that. And actually our plant has a education center that is basically a big conference room where we entertain, public outreach, continuous public outreach for the course of the lifetime of the plant, which is a minimum of 20 years. So we are very much part of the community, and without that, you can't really pull off a successful project.
I have one thought. So on the resource side, if you look at beyond just communities of who's near a facility, but look at small farmers and small dairy farmers who are going to come under these penalties for emitting greenhouse gas emissions, and yet they aren't of the scale to purchase these anaerobic digesters and do them themselves. So they're kind of stuck, and there is a real concern that these, with the price of milk not being very high, that all these farms may go to other states. So do we want them to go to other states where they're no longer being penalized for emitting methane, or do we want to help support that community and find a way of getting into this technology? So that's something that I've been really passionate about, is identifying how to get the smaller scale sources of emissions on board, whether that's clustering or some new technology. But again, there's a lot of risk for these farmers, and so going into it, not just proving to them that the chemistry or science works, but that it financially works and that they're reliable, low-carbon fuel credits that can be obtained is really key, I think, in seeing movement for the smaller guys.
I just had a quick follow-up question. I was wondering if you all surveyed any of the population and see if the folks had any recommendations for your programs and if you implemented those recommendations.
Does anyone want to speak to that one?
Yes.
I saw another question here.
I had a question for Thomas and then for Mark. For Thomas, I wanted to know for the 35 tons per year that you process, how much energy do you produce, and what your cost of electricity is, and if it's your output. And then for Mark, I wanted to know if that happens with the CO2 that comes out of the biogas process.
Sure. So the facility in St. Louis is 35,000 tons per year capacity, so roughly about 72 tons a day. Our permit maxes out at 100 tons a day. That's about, 13, 14 truckloads, garbage type trucks. And as far as electricity outputs, we have a 850 kW nameplate engine. With the current recipe, we're expecting to produce about 760 or so kW. That can change a little bit depending on if you feed or what feedstocks you actually end up putting through. Right now we're feeding a lot of green waste, which is low energy potential. We're planning on increasing the food waste fraction of that and also put fats, oil, and greases in there, which make a lot of gas. So we theoretically could max out that engine. And I think you asked about how much electricity cost is. We are getting the biomass tariff that was mentioned earlier in our conversation here, which is 12.7 cents a kilowatt hour through the biomass program, and we're connecting to PG&E grid, which is the local utility provider.
So the CO2 physically and chemically is emitted as CO2. The methane is burned to CO2. I'm not a greenhouse gas expert, and I know I'm probably in a room full of them, but as I understand it, this is biogenic CO2. This is CO2 that was in the food chain, that was in, so it doesn't add to the global CO2 burden like digging coal out of the ground does, and I believe legally and accounting-wise it also does not add to the CO2 burden.
So yeah, we'll do. All right. Well, for the people on the web, that's the reason for the mic.
You said 768 kilowatts capacity?
Yes.
Okay, so is that a net? E.g., what's the amount of capacity that's required to run it? We are feeding everything into the grid through that biomass tariff, and we are buying the electricity from the grid to run the facility because it's a lower value or lower cost. But it's about 200, 250 or so kilowatts that it takes to run all the motors and mixers and everything else, shredders. That's about half a megawatt?
250.
The net.
Yeah, the net would be half a megawatt.
Okay. I'll do one more question, and then I'm going to have each of our panelists sort of give a closing vignette.
My name is Julie Lineback. I'm with Kearns and West, and we have done some of the public outreach to some of these digester to farms, but I think they're more mid to maybe large range. And so I'm interested in what you said about the small farmers and your outreach to them, and I'm interested in the process for how you do that, and if there is funding for them to be able to cluster maybe through the CEC. You started talking about it. I'm curious if you could say a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So I think coming this summer, UC Davis is going to have a CDFA-funded project published that's going to actually look at what is the definition of a small farm. How many cows is that? What's the location? Where this cutoff kind of is for becoming eligible for anaerobic digestion. And so I have not gone out and spoken to the farmers. However, we're actively pitching for additional funding to do that kind of work. And the clustering is something that our model can look at. And so we're not assuming that they're trucking the manure. We're assuming that they're going to cluster the biogas if it is a viable solution to do it. And so there's a point where you're small enough that you should just post it, honestly. And then there's other points where you can collect the biogas. And so the dairy industry is they do get subsidies for creating these digesters, and that's why there's a real sweet spot for doing this. On the composting point, though, I will say that a lot of people don't think about these byproducts of these system, so biochar or digestate. And in California, where you have a rainy season, you have to consider there are certain seasons, well, certain parts of the country, state, where you can't land apply this anymore. And so assuming you have those credits and offset of fertilizer is a really bad idea. And then there are some landfills like in Alameda County that are no longer taking any form of food waste. And so you're really stuck. There's a risk there, and so I think there's more work to be done to help mitigate that risk.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, so I just want to give the opportunity to each of our panelists to reflect and just share anything they think is relevant, sort of looking out towards the future. What are the biggest challenges, or where do you see your agency going, or where do you see the biggest research challenges looking forward? So I'll just start to my far left.
Sure. The biggest challenges are implementing those projects, obviously, and what it takes is legislation, as I had mentioned earlier already, and with that, innovative companies that provide solutions so municipalities, for instance, small farmers are able to implement those technologies without too much risk, or waste haulers, dairy farmers, or even municipalities. They have a job. The waste hauler collects waste. The dairy farmer makes milk. The municipality cleans up the water for the city. They are not necessarily wanting to run such facilities, and that's where innovative providers come in, such as ours, that will offer a P3 model or a cooperation agreement with a cluster of farms. So that it's finally here, I think. The time has come. Legislation is in place. There's big goals that Governor Brown signed into office before he left. So I think the time is ripe right now to really start making headway and catch up with what Europe's been doing for the past 25 years.
I guess just in general, reflecting on the last couple of years of the CEC project, is that there is great potential for bioenergy in the state. However, being practical about the logistics and what's at a community level, so thinking at a community level, not just a one-size-fits-all, and coupling it with the closure of landfills and understanding how different areas are going to really come under pressure at different time points versus what our climate change mitigation goals are for the state. So there's a lot of pressure to have action right away, and yet there still is a lot of space in the landfill unless the legislation really cracks down in ways that make sense. So the 75% diversion goal of organics is really, really hard to reach. So how are we going to support the development of infrastructure to reach that goal?
The bulk of our discussion is focused on the near term, the next 5 to 10 years. That's what we've talked about here. But I want to tell you, I've been following Sebastian's work since they started with Silicon Valley Clean Water. And the nature of our industry is changing pretty dramatically because of what's going on in California, and not many people have realized it yet. So it's great to have this conversation, but with the advancement of cloud computing, what's called artificial intelligence, which I think is kind of funny because it's just sort of advanced learning algorithms, and the opportunities to reduce energy consumption and target permit limits at facilities, I believe we're going to see a radical transition in the wastewater industry, which is going to make solids conversion even more important. As the state ratchets up its organics diversion, its desire to focus on renewable energies, we're going to see more mechanical separation technologies that divert organics further up in the treatment process, such as Sebastian is working on the research right now. I have never been more excited than where we are. I wish I had another 30 years rather than almost 30 years behind me because of what the opportunities are for technological advancements as well as to produce renewable power. It's just amazing when I look out in the next few decades. So watch very carefully what Hannah and Sebastian are in, because I firmly believe that that represents the future, and that's what we'll see implemented in about 20 years.
Wow, thank you. Just to build on that, something that I think that we didn't talk too much about, but that's should always be present in our minds and residents of California is drought. So in the future, we're going to be asking our utilities not just to handle more of these organic solids, but also to think about how are we addressing these questions of water scarcity. And that has a big energy liability associated with it. So that's one of the reasons that we're working on some of these technologies. In particular, the one that we're trying to tackle, aerobic wastewater treatment, hasn't really changed in about 100 years. There's a big possibility there, a big potential to potentially flip the energy balance there, and in so doing also actually free up extra space, extra digester capacity for processing some of these high-strength organics. So there's a lot of potentials there, but as Logan and Mark have both alluded to, these utilities need to keep the lights on in the meantime. And so there I'm just going to say that these kinds of grants the California Energy Commission puts together are really, really critical to enable these kinds of partnerships where a university can bring forward a potentially transformative technology and then start partnering with a really innovative, forward-thinking utility to bring these things to a point where they can be readily deployed and start de-risking those. So that's something that I think that the CECs has a lot of vision to do that, and I certainly commend them for that.
So everybody said everything I was about to say, but I'll say, 40 years into my environmental engineering career, it's real exciting that, I'm involved in solid waste, I'm involved in renewable energy, I'm involved in wastewater treatment, and we're still finding new things to improve the environment. So I just urge everybody here, keep coming up with those ideas. Just check the laws of physics first, and I'll listen to them.
And on a positive note, I want to thank all of our panelists. Well, we're on break.
You've made it to the final panel of the day. Congratulations to you all. We are going to talk today about resilient and equitable communities. And I think everyone has everyone's bios. My name is Martha Guzman Aceves. I'm a commissioner at the Public Utilities Commission. And I also have the privilege of having the EPIC program as one of the proceedings that I work on. So it's really exciting to be here and seeing all of this innovation and partnership at these conferences annually. You all should have a brief bio of all of the speakers. So I'm going to save that time and let us go into, we're going to hear about 3 EPIC projects, and they're going to each speak a little bit about their projects, and we're going to go into some questions, and then more importantly, some discourse with all of you and taking some questions for hopefully the last 20 minutes. So with that, I'm going to start off with one particular project that 2 of our speakers are partnering on today. And we have Michelle Turdo, who is the Associate Sustainable Asset Manager at Link Housing, and she'll talk to you about that. Partnering with Ram Narayanamurthy, who is the Technical Executive at EPRI. So Ram and Michelle, if you guys can take it away, and I can help you with your PowerPoint here.
Thank you, Commissioner Martha. Again, thank you again for everyone for coming in, and it's the last session of today, so it's been a great day. Hope all of you enjoyed yourself. Very quickly, I think Michelle and I are going to tag team. Michelle is the one who actually has to do all the hard work with her tenants, do the community. I'm the one who gets to go out there and just throw brainstorms out there and throw technologies at the wall and see what sticks. But together, I think, we've been working on a few different projects, and the focus, again, is trying to understand how do we create healthy, affordable communities, right? So Michelle will come in and provide an overview of Link Housing and also provide the property owner and the tenant or the customer point of view. When we talk about affordable communities, I think the panel is titled Resilient and Equitable Communities. But there's a few different aspects to it. when we talk about these communities, I think the focus that we try to take is how do you improve the quality of life for the occupant, for the customers who are in those homes. And when we look at it from that perspective, things like efficiency, decarbonization, electrification, local generation, all of that, yes, there is a aspect to it about reducing customer cost and customer energy burden, but there's also another unique aspect, which is about improving their health and comfort. Many of these communities have, for example, they've been there for 40, 50 years, they haven't gone through cycles of retrofits. So how do you actually improve the quality of life for the people living there, right? Whether it's increasing insulation, whether it's bringing in fresh air, whether it's reducing their indoor air or improving their indoor air quality, how do these types of measures and these types of initiatives work together to provide both energy affordability and improve the quality of life? So within this segment, we have a few different initiatives going on, many of them through the EPIC program. So I'll just go around in a little bit of a loop. So one of the ones that we're working on that we actually completed a couple of years ago through the PEER program was taking the first look at how do you do deep retrofits in low-income multifamily housing. We worked with Link Housing. There was a project in Lancaster, and that one was looking at both gas and electric efficiency retrofits. And so we implemented a whole suite of emerging technologies, things like, I think UC Davis talked about aerosol air sealing, so we looked at air sealing. We looked at improving insulation, spray foam insulation. So a lot of different technologies as a suite. And one of the interesting parts was also that there was a little bit of job training also offered by the solar contractor. So a lot of the residents, I mean, when they got their certificates for being trained to implement or install PV, their faces were just beamed, right? Another one we are looking at right now is going into an existing full community. There's a couple of communities we are working on, one in Fresno, one in Ontario, looking at completely going in and doing complete retrofits, as well as looking at electrification of these communities so that we can actually decarbonize the system in these communities. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. Another example is what we find in a lot of these communities is we have new technologies that use Wi-Fi, they use all kinds of connected devices. But a lot of these communities the tenants don't have access to Wi-Fi. They don't have access to broadband. So that creates a digital divide, which I think a lot of people have talked about, the digital divide in terms of information and learning. But we find that could also create a digital divide in terms of programs, energy technologies and programs. For example, you look at a smart thermostat program. A lot of these communities cannot accept the existing smart thermostats that are out there, so they cannot get the benefits of those types of devices because they don't have broadband Wi-Fi. Another example, we're looking at solar storage and DC power, and the goal there is to look at how do you do comprehensive solar plus storage with these communities, provide resilience, but also provide cost-effective local generation. And another example, working in Fresno with another developer, we are looking at how do you do new construction, right? This one is going to be, we're looking at all electric with all electric and zero net energy. So moving more towards that zero carbon. I know the zero carbon calculation, that's from a very geeky standpoint, that's like an hourly calculation, do a lot of involved things. But again, looking at what kind of technologies can enable new construction. So these are some of the projects that are ongoing. Diving into what we have in the existing communities, those are actually pictures from the community in Fresno. There's evaporative coolers, there's gas wall heaters, there's issues with indoor air quality due to these older evaporative coolers. Comfort is an issue. And then how do you replace lighting to improve quality of lighting in those communities? And then on the other side, we have some examples of the technologies that have been implemented. One on the top left under the updated systems, that's actually replacing an existing 20-year-old air conditioner with a new high-efficiency heat pump. So in one sweep, you're able to do decarbonization, you're able to do electrification and provide better comfort to the tenants. We are looking at new products. So one of the things we find as a barrier to many of these communities is the products that are designed are either too expensive or in a lot of cases, we just don't have enough electric distribution to be able to do the HVAC systems upgrades. So we're looking at technologies from Italy, for example, that can plug in at 110 volts and provide a retrofit heat pump solution. So there's a lot of interesting technologies that you get into as you get into the depths of these projects. So what did we learn? When we go through the electrification process, so we've done the efficiency. There are technologies that work well, like community water heating systems in multifamily communities on the efficiency side. But when you go into electrification, what we find is that one of the big barriers is a lot of these communities don't have enough electric distribution capability. I think Michelle will talk a little bit more about her experiences trying to understand or trying to upgrade these systems. So then the cost of these upgrades start climbing quite rapidly when you're doing retrofits. So that's one of those pieces that we are still working through. We're looking at new technologies. Some of the analysis and learnings fit back into things like, I think it actually aligns with the affordability pilots in San Joaquin Valley. So some of these, it's in a sense, it's parallel in terms of the technology implementation and evaluations. So that's part of what we have to do as a state, look at the infrastructure and what we have to do on the infrastructure to be able to upgrade existing communities to be able to decarbonize the building stock. And finally, when we look at it from a holistic manner, how does Michelle, as a property owner, implement these upgrades? What has to happen is we have to be able to synthesize this alphabet soup of programs, multiple programs. There's utility programs, there's low-income weatherization program, and then as well as things like the solar generation program, on-bill financing. There's just a whole host of programs. And for a property owner, how do you actually get those programs to work together in a concerted manner so that you can do these deep upgrades that can improve the quality of life of the tenants? And then finally, how do you take all these programs and wrap financing around it, whether it's through tax credit refinancing, which happens in the life of these buildings, or also how do you bring in third-party financing systems that can actually wrap upgrades, the retrofits, and the programs together so that you can actually have an easy-to-implement package for the property. So that's it. So it goes all the way from the technology side, what technologies work, to ultimately taking to the point where a property owner can apply the suite of technologies in a coherent manner. So with that, I will transfer it over to Michelle to talk about her perspective on what we put her through.
Hi, my name is Michelle Turto. I work for Link Housing, an affordable housing developer. We're a nonprofit in Long Beach, and we have properties all over California. And we have two properties that we've done a lot of work with Ebrion. We have a property in Ontario. We have a property in Fresno called Pleasant View. And to me, they're fascinating because they're retrofit properties. And I feel like a lot of a lot of the discussions that we've had today, a lot of the presentations have focused on new properties. But if we are looking to, decarbonize all of our buildings by 2045, which is something that, the Building Decarbonization Coalition did a study on recently, we're going to have to focus on, the large amounts of retrofit, the large amounts of existing properties we have, and the fact that a large amount of them are in disadvantaged communities where it's hard to find the capital to retrofit them. So I'm going to be talking about two things that I've learned throughout this process, two issues that we've run into. One is building codes, and the second part is working with residents on these issues. So on building codes, one thing that we've run into is that even as property owners, once we've actually started, trying to understand once we've actually tried to understand, what we're dealing with our properties, sometimes we're even shocked ourselves at kind of the condition of our properties and the fact that there are many ways that are not compliant with the code. And in many ways, Title 24, it's great for new buildings, but when it comes to bringing our old buildings up to those standards, it can be very expensive. It can take a very long time. So we have one property, Pleasant View. It's in Fresno.
And there are three things that we discovered in the process of trying to figure out how do we, make this a better property for our residents. One, we needed to upgrade the panels in order to do any sort of, heat pumps, any sort of high efficiency heat pumps, because our panels could only handle 110 volt heat pumps, and each building, can only handle 100 amps. And so, we asked around, we saw, how long would it take to upgrade these panels? It would take $200,000, and it would require an extensive permitting process. Even with the CEC funding that we had, we didn't have money in our budget for that. We also discovered in the process of installing solar that our transmission lines were buried straight just in the ground. And so we actually had to add conduit to it. And, thankfully we were able to negotiate with PG&E, and they were able to come in and do the work for free. But if they weren't able to, it would have cost us $131,000 just to put conduit on some lines. And even then, PG&E, it took them 9 months to do this project. And then we also discovered that this property has no insulation whatsoever. AA actually came in, did a preliminary study. They thought it did. No insulation at all. And so, thankfully, we've been working with the Energy Savings Program to look at getting that covered. But I think it just speaks to the fact that a lot of our buildings, especially when it comes to affordable housing, we develop great buildings, but we also buy a lot of buildings. Pleasant View is a building that, was built in the 1970s and that we bought recently, and we're only starting to discover what are the issues with it, because when it comes to, what we look at when it comes to, is this a property that's worth it to buy, we don't look at if it's compliant with Title 24 or what it would take to get it up to there. And so, in that respect, one thing that we've discovered is that, first we need to understand what would it take to get these properties up to code compliance. And then we can start thinking about, what technology is available that we can use Title 24 standards on. A lot of the technology I've seen today is reliant on the idea that all of our buildings are already compliant. And if they aren't, what are we going to do? And so with that said, I think it'd be interesting to look at CEC funds and incentives that incorporate the costs of bringing buildings up to code compliance. The second thing I'd like to talk about is, how do we deal with our residents? And so, even though a lot of our buildings have code compliance issues, a lot of our buildings are also, they may not be code compliant in other ways, but they're still functioning pretty well. They're still comfortable. And so, one thing that we did with our Pleasant View project was that we did a survey with UC Davis, kind of asking residents to talk about what are some issues they have. And we were surprised that they actually really love their water heaters. Their water heaters, they weren't the most energy efficient, but they worked well, they were comfortable. And we had actually originally envisioned installing water heaters first, but because we did that survey, we knew that, that's something that we didn't have to prioritize. And I think something that we see often in, single-family housing is this bespoke service where someone comes in and talks to people and says, what are some issues you're having with this house? What are some issues you're having with your electricity, what you want to do? And I think when it comes to multifamily affordable housing, we very quickly just jump into, greenhouse gas emission numbers. We very quickly jump into energy savings, and we don't look at, doing a survey first and actually take into consideration what do residents feel like they need for comfort. So first, I think we need to focus on, making sure that we prioritize the right upgrades. And then, the second thing I want to talk about is sensitivity. So the way that affordable housing works, we don't just have general affordable housing for general populations. We also have housing for various vulnerable communities. So, for example, we service what we call permanent supportive housing. So that's people who are disabled or who are formerly homeless. We also have housing that services seniors and veterans. And especially when it comes to affordable housing in California, there's been a lot of funding over the past decade for permanent supportive housing and seniors. So, at least when it comes to linked housing, a significant amount of our housing, services these vulnerable populations. And a lot of times, when we think about these upgrades, we don't think about, what these populations need. For example, we were looking at including induction cookware for our property in Pleasant View. And in many ways, that's great because, induction cookware is safe for kids and for seniors. But one issue that we are possibly running into is for our permanent supportive housing populations, they're formerly homeless. They don't have the money to buy expensive new cookware, and there's also a lot of issues of turnover. And so, what happens if people move in? Do we have to buy them cookware every single time they move in? How do we deal with that case? And especially if people have just left the street, how do we get them to understand how to use smart thermostats? I mean, I've never used a smart thermostat myself. And, you probably need to talk it through for 10 minutes for someone like me, And so I think that then goes to my third point about how we need more of an emphasis on, not just code compliance, but I would kind of term it like technology compliance. Link Housing, we have a service, Link Cares, that it's a department that goes to a lot of our properties and discusses, how do you save energy and how do you also deal with, small things like paying your rent, paying the bills and stuff like that. And, unfortunately, we don't have the time and the space to have training that goes far deeper into a lot of the issues that we have talked about today in this meeting. And so I would say that when it comes to incentives and, CEC programs that would further help this population, we also need money for training for people to go out there who understand these people, who understand our issues, and just say, this is why you do it, and this is why it's important. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Ram and Michelle. I think you guys have put out some very powerful questions for us in terms of who continues to pay for these things, whose responsibility is it? Is it the landowner? Is it us in different forms? Is it the ratepayers? Is it the taxpayer? Those questions we hope to discuss with all of you, as well as letting the communities or the residents really prioritize these investments. And I will say that in some of the outreach we were doing in the San Joaquin Valley on those projects, the reality of the distribution system, not only the cost of upgrades, but the reliability of it is a definite factor for fuel switching. So we're going to continue with Andy, who's going to talk more about this sector and some of the innovation they're doing with their project.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Brooks. Again, I'm with the Association for Energy Affordability. We're a nonprofit that focuses on bringing the benefits of clean energy to low-income communities. Most of our work is the vast majority of our work is in multifamily housing. And most of what we do is program implementation and also research and demonstration. And I'm going to give a very high-level overview of one of the EPIC projects that we are working on with project partners that are shown on that slide, some of whom are in the room. We have Build It Green, Stone Energy Associates, and Redwood Energy are all on that. And the project is called Optimizing Water Heating Performance for Multifamily ZNE. And the project is actually more encompassing than that. It is focused on ZNE more broadly, but a big emphasis is on research around water heating in particular. So it's comprised of 4 demonstration projects, all of which are affordable housing. They're all deed restricted, owned by nonprofit developers, owned and operated by nonprofit developers. The first one is Calistoga. That is a 48-unit building in Climate Zone 2, houses farm workers. And we've got another project in Cloverdale, same climate zone, 3-story multifamily building, 31 units, also houses farm workers. And there's a theme. Atascadero, the third project, is also farm worker housing. So we've got 3 of the 4 projects are farm worker housing, 59 units for that building. And then the fourth one, Benner Plaza, is a 3-story over podium, 66-unit building in Sunnyvale. And just to give a high-level overview of the types of systems they have at these buildings, again, we're monitoring all facets, but the focus is on the mechanicals. So Calistoga has a heat pump chiller or reverse cycle chiller. So it's a central plant that is providing heating, cooling, and domestic hot water. And I think in one of the earlier sessions around building electrification, there was a question about whether there are products available on the market, heat pump products for those purposes for commercial applications. And this is an example of one that is really actually really more for commercial applications, but we're using it in this case in a multifamily application. And these systems have a component to them where they have the capacity to, when in cooling mode, they extract the heat that comes back from the fan coils, the waste heat that comes back in cooling mode, and transfers it over to the heating side. So the systems operate at their peak efficiencies at the highest COPs when in simultaneous heating and cooling mode. So that's Calistoga. Cloverdale has almost the exact same system, but with some modifications or some differences in piping, pumping, and controls, but they're pretty minimal changes. By and large, the same type of system. Atascadero has much more typical, kind of common electric systems for mechanicals. They've got individual, each unit is served by an individual heat pump water heater, which you see on the right, and then an individual heat pump HVAC system on the left. And our focus on this project, or one of the things that we're focusing on, is around the use of heat pump water heaters for thermal storage. So actually starting next week, we've been monitoring all these systems for quite some time now. We've collected baseline data, and next week we'll be starting some experiments where we're testing different load shifting strategies. So charging these tanks over a certain period of time to a higher than standard temperature, and then riding through grid peak for as long as we can. And there's a variety of different strategies that we're going to be testing, different set point temperatures for setback, different load up temperatures, different mode changes. And that's kind of one of the more exciting things that I think will come out of that project. And the last project is Benner has two central water heating plants that are both CO2-based heat pump water heaters. So in this case, we've got what is originally designed as a unitary type system, like the type that would be used in a single-family home. We've kind of cobbled together to turn it into a central system. So multiple heat pumps charging, either you can do multiple large tanks or individual tanks. And this is a system that's becoming more common. We're doing these systems in some of the programs that we implement as well. And in this project, we got to kind of test out a bunch of the kind of best practices that we've learned from some of the smaller projects that we've done and projects that others have done, and kind of cobble that together. And one of the unique things that that I'll probably speak to later is just kind of the transfer of knowledge between programs and research. And this is a good example of that. I'll talk about that a little bit later, though. All of the projects are kind of extensively instrumented, and that's been over the course of the last year. We've been getting all of the monitoring equipment installed and tested, working through a variety of network-related issues, which has turned out to be probably the biggest challenge of this project, is dealing with Wi-Fi communications and routers and modems going down and things of that nature. And that's been a big lesson learned, I think, that will ultimately end up playing into, I think, future smart control strategies in terms of demand response, what kind of network communications are actually going to work and be effective. So basically, these are a few of the research questions that are focused at least on the domestic hot water side of things. We're really trying to improve our understanding of the economic and performance trade-offs of a few of these things. So central versus individual systems. We have 3 of the buildings have central type systems, and 1 of them has individuals. But we have lots of other projects where we have unitary equipment or individual systems per apartment to use as a baseline comparison. Combined systems versus separate. So those first 2 projects were examples of one system providing heating, cooling, and domestic versus the other projects that have those systems separated out, and there are kind of benefits and downsides to both of those. Electric versus natural gas, obviously. These are all electric properties, but we've got plenty of natural gas projects to compare them to. And then finally, the thermal storage and load shifting that I talked about at the Atascadero project. And ultimately, there are a lot of results that are going to come out of this project, but the main one is the design guides and best practices kind of tools that we will develop that come out of this, as well as a bunch of algorithms, code-related algorithms, and code recommendation changes. Just to touch on one other project that we're involved with that's due to launch in Q2 of this year. This is a project with Rocky Mountain Institute and a slew of other partners who are all indicated on there, and this is around the idea of mass deployment model for zero net energy retrofits. And it's basically building on a program model that has been very innovative and very successful in the Netherlands, where they've been able to basically productize a lot of the kind of comprehensive retrofit solutions, where they're able to go into a multifamily property or go to a multifamily property and retrofit that building in a matter of days. It's a very different building type than we have in California, but there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that model that we'll be applying in this. And the general idea is that we are already able to do zero net energy retrofits in California, and we are doing them under some of the programs. But each project is very customized. Each project takes a very long time to build. It's very expensive. The construction practices are unconventional. The design practices are unconventional. There's really not a template or standard approach to it. So this is really around developing a set of retrofit packages that can be essentially prefabricated, customized but prefabricated for a variety of different multifamily building types, and then rolled out and deployed in a much shorter period of time. And there's also a big financing piece of it, of the program as well, that I don't have time to get into, but we might touch on that later. So that's it for me, high-level overview. Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to continue on with Assistant Professor Dr. Peter Alstone, who's at Humboldt State University, and we'll also be talking about some of these similar-sized projects. So let me pull up your here. By the way, I did hear about some of the, I'm not seeing a mouse anymore, Rocky Mountain Institute and their passive solar retrofits, which I thought was really interesting. Uh-huh. Oh, here you go. Here's the back. See if that shows up.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and I'm happy to talk to you today about our project called Solar Plus for small and medium commercial buildings. I want to recognize this is funded by the EPIC program, and we have partners. I'm at the Schatz Energy Research Center at Humboldt State University. We've got really strong partners in Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Core Technology Partner, and Blue Lake Rancheria, our deployment partner. And the photo you're seeing here is of the canopy of a gas station that's owned and operated by Blue Lake Rancheria. It almost got 60 kilowatts of solar on it. In this photo, it's got 60 kW today. And this is it's a view of the surrounding area. We get to work and live in a very beautiful place up in Humboldt County. I appreciate that. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the technology that we're developing. This is really an advanced technology project, and it's being done in a disadvantaged community. And we're getting a lot of advanced R&D done and doing it in a place that's not traditionally focused on for advanced R&D. We're also focusing on a building sector that is an underserved building sector. We're looking at gas stations. This is not the first place clean energy professionals look when they're looking for a place to put solar. We kind of say, oh, let's forget that they exist, but there are 12,000 gas stations in California, and these are critical facilities for resilience during natural disasters. There's a really good reason to put microgrids there. So our driving research question for this project is, can we make microgrids streamlined and affordable for small sites with high resilience value? You know, they're called microgrids, but microgrids actually tend to go at pretty big campus scale, big buildings. And the reason microgrids go places that are big is because there's a big fixed cost to design them and to get them interconnected and to put all the switchgear together that makes the solar and storage be able to island and operate the building isolated from the grid. That's what a microgrid means. If you just have solar and storage and the grid goes down, you're typically, without anything extra, your site's going to go down too. A microgrid kind of makes the solar and storage do what you'd expect it to do, which is keep the lights on during a blackout. So we're doing that for gas stations, and we're miniaturizing microgrids. So we're looking for ways of doing a fully featured system where we're able to provide reactive power support for the distribution system. We're using model predictive controls that are being developed by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab team to optimize the controls of our storage assets and also of the HVAC and the refrigeration loads in these convenience stores. Looking at ways that we can target deployment for the highest value sites, partly using advanced metering infrastructure, smart meter data. There's also just some sort of reality rules of thumb where you're going to put these in places where fire trucks need to roll during a disaster, or rural communities where the convenience store might be the real hub of the community during a time of need. And that the smart meter is not going to tell you that. They just go there and figure that out. We're also looking at ways, gas stations, like I said, aren't the first place you'd look for clean energy, but EVs are here in California, and they're only going to be more and more of a future use case for these buildings. The gas station owners we talk to want to be EV charging station operators also in the future. They see the writing on the wall there. That means that we've got 12,000 sites that are going to be getting major electrical upgrades. Maybe not all of them, but thousands of them will be getting major electrical upgrades in the coming years. We want to be ready with a microgrid resilience package that's ready to go there. And that's disadvantaged and advantaged communities alike. And finally, we're looking at ways that we can provide a value proposition to owners and operators at these sites. Most gas stations are operated by single owner or a person who owns a couple gas stations. Most of them are not operated by the corporate entity whose sign is on the front. So it's actually a quite challenging segment to deliver energy services because of that. So for all those reasons, it's hard, but if we can do the first, second, and third project at a place that's hard, it makes it easier to scale up these systems. So we see that as an advantage as well. So the tasks that we're doing in this research project is we're designing and constructing a solar and battery system. The specs on that are it's a 60 kW solar array and a 109 kW, 174 kWh battery. It's enough to not quite net out the energy demand. Convenience stores, actually, it turns out, are the most energy-intense commercial building per square foot of any commercial building. And it's because of the giant walk-in coolers that hold all the cold beer and cold drinks and ice cream, and then typically really poor insulation, big doors that open when you walk in. So there's a lot of energy to play with here. We're designing and implementing software for model predictive control to optimize the operation of these facilities. And then once it's built, this is going to be this summer, we're going to be operating and testing our ability to provide demand response service to the grid, to provide a value proposition to the owners, and really understand kind of what happens when we kick the tires of this microgrid at the gas station. All along the way, we've been doing market research. We're in touch with the industry association for the fueling station industry in California and nationally, and are connecting with their members to kind of understand what do they need. What are the things that they're looking for and the problems they're trying to solve, and we can see how our research fits in with their problem, rather than the other way around. And we're doing synthesis work where we'd like to roll this into a hardware and software package that, with a little bit more work, can be ready to deploy and to scale up. Now, that's the vision. We don't want to just do this once. And so I'd like to speak a little bit now about our partner on this project, the Blue Lake Rancheria. And so this Blue Lake Rancheria is a federally recognized Indian tribe. They were actually one of the tribes that had their tribal status terminated in the 1950s. They had to fight for 25 years to get tribal status again. That happened in 1983. And since then, they were able to get back some of the land that was taken away during that termination period. And what they've done with it is they've turned themselves into a real clean energy deployment leader. So in the foreground of this picture, and you'll actually notice this is the same picture, it turns out, that's on the front of your program today. So if you look at the second picture over, That's Blue Lake Rancheria on the very front cover of the program. There's a 500 kilowatt microgrid with a megawatt hour of storage, and that's providing support to their economic enterprise, which is a hotel and casino complex. And in the background, and the white dotted line in this photo, is where our fueling station is. And we're doing work at that fueling station to do the second microgrid at the Blue Lake Rancheria. And they've been a very valuable partner for us. And so I'd like to, sort of stepping back, what's it take to do clean energy scale up, not just in a disadvantaged community, but broadly? And I kind of come back to the theme of, our project illustrates what it takes is connections. So one kind of connections that we're making are the technology that we're developing is about connecting together solar and storage, load control, EV charging. We really need to focus on what the glue is that puts all these pieces together. We can't just have super fancy widgets and throw them all out there and expect it all to work. It takes a lot of extra work to kind of put mortar between all these bricks. So that's one kind of connection. Another kind of connection is looking at buildings like the gas station as a way that communities connect. So on good days, it's a good place to go get a cup of coffee and run into your neighbor. So community buildings are, valuable sources of connection for people. But on bad days, when we've got a flood or an earthquake, there's a wildfire, or maybe there's even the risk of a wildfire and the grid is turned off, these are sites that need to stay online because they provide valuable service. When you roll trucks, you need to fill them with gas. People often treat convenience stores and gas stations as de facto meeting points in times of need. So we want to be able to provide resilience to these kinds of sites. We heard about really valuable housing-related projects, and there's other ways that we need to build community. And the last kind of connection I want to emphasize for scaling up renewable energy is connecting communities with the research community. So we're working with the Blue Lake Rancheria, and in a lot of ways, the Schatz Energy Research Center where I work, a lot of different university and community-based organizations are the connections between these universities and the best available technology. And this is the way that we're going to do it. It's by making community connections and using our public agencies, our university systems, all of that support to really connect together communities with technology. So, thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and it sounds like you and Michelle are on the same path there with needing those bridge makers to make some of this be replicated. And once again, I am not the mouse. Okay, well, Madeline Stano from Green Lining is going to join us next here and continue this conversation. Sorry, Madeline.
It's over there again.
Oh, look, you can see it on there, just not on here.
Not there.
There we go. Okay. Let's see.
Okay, great. How many dells does it take for a community advocate to be around technology people? Hi, my name is Madeline. Thank you so much to the Energy Commission and to Commissioner Guzman-Aceves and to all of you for the opportunity to spend time with you today. I'm very excited to talk with you all. And I just do want to recognize as well the California Energy Commission's continued commitment to low-income and environmental justice communities and better serving them through EPIC. My name is Madeline, and I am the Energy Equity Legal Counsel at the Green Lining Institute, which is a racial justice nonprofit in Oakland, California. Our mission is to ensure that race is never a barrier to economic opportunities and that communities of color can prosper. My work focuses on supporting a community-led just transition away from fossil fuels, where those who are most impacted by the fossil fuel status quo can prosper. We'll move through. I came to learn about EPIC and advocate for more equity in EPIC while working on oil pollution issues in the San Joaquin Valley a few years ago. And I wanted to open my remarks by sharing a photo of Sequoia Elementary School in Shafter, California, in the San Joaquin Valley. Sequoia Elementary sits in one of the most environmentally and socially overburdened census tracts in California. As you can see, lurking in the photo, one of the sources contributing to their pollution burden is well stimulation of oil wells. This well sits just 1,200 feet from a public elementary school. This is the community, specifically community activist Annabelle Marquez, that asked me to research clean energy opportunities as a community advocate. And that research led to the drafting and passage of Assembly Bill 523, championed by keynote speaker, Assemblymember Eloise Gomez-Reyes, sponsored by the California Environmental Justice Alliance and the Women's Foundation of California, which directs the percentage of the Technology Demonstration and Deployment EPIC Fund administered by the CEC to projects located in and benefiting low-income and disadvantaged communities like Annabelle's. I learned from residents negatively impacted by energy pollution, both in terms of higher rates of pollution and higher energy burdens in the San Joaquin Valley, and later saw confirmed in the CEC's incredible SB 350 low-income barrier study that low-income communities of color, environmental justice communities, and Cal Enviro Screen defined disadvantaged communities, although ratepayers who are paying a higher percentage of their income for energy with their health and with their well-being, as well as their pocketbooks, were not benefiting from state clean energy programs at the same rate as other Californians. Low-income Californians spend nearly 3 times the percentage of their income on energy compared to their more affluent counterparts. Before the passage of Assembly Bill 523, only 14% of funds were going to disadvantaged communities. In its first year of implementation, the CEC has invested 30% of funds into these communities. I'm encouraged by this incredible progress and the continued commitments of CEC staff to work with community-based organizations and residents of environmental justice communities to deliver the benefits of EPIC to the communities that need them the most. However, I wouldn't be an advocate if I didn't invite you all in this room to do more. I am Midwestern by origin, so I will do so politely, but I am watching all of you, and I take notes. I view the EPIC program and Assembly Bill 523 implementation as a just transition policy. The just transition, originally a term from Canadian labor organizer Brian Kohler, who said there's no choice between jobs or the environment. It's both or neither. The just transition in the environmental justice context evolved to refer to the social, political, and technological shift from dirtier fuels, where Californians of color and low-income Californians continue to bear the brunt of negative impacts, whether that be climate, health, economy, to an energy system, an economy, and a way of relating to natural resources where all living things can prosper. The technological shift you are leading the world on presents an opportunity to mitigate the harms of our fossil fuel status quo, to deliver meaningful benefits to communities historically redlined and excluded from affordable and safe energy services. A just transition is rooted in the principles of environmental justice from the First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, 2 of which particularly of note for today that 2 speakers have already touched on. The first is we speak for ourselves, and the second is the rights of communities to self-determine. When asking ourselves as innovators or regulators or really anyone or community advocates, how do we deploy beneficial technologies in environmental justice communities? The first question is, what are the community needs? The experts to speak to those needs, the local resources available, the opportunities within these communities are the residents of these communities themselves. A just transition requires procedural justice, the opportunity for residents of these communities to state their needs in their own words, on their own terms, and lead on the solutions they desire, and distributive justice, where regulators, innovators, whomever, meaningfully incorporates their expertise into actual beneficial projects, the outcomes. Now, if you are unsympathetic to equity concerns or environmental justice values and are purely focused on the success of your technology, I would first encourage you to privately rethink that and spend some time journaling. But secondly, I would make the business case for investing in these communities anyway. Developers and utilities experience significant market delivery problems in these wildly under-researched and underserved customers. They are a significant part of the current and future market for your technologies. They offer tremendous local resources, advocates, and community-based organizations willing to partner with all of you. We cannot reach our climate and environmental goals without transitioning these communities. So whatever you care about, I encourage you all to prioritize investments in these communities. Excellent. All right. Now, before we get started on this community engagement I mentioned, we have to recognize the lack of relationships and trust between folks in this room and the majority of folks living and working in environmental justice communities. For example, my colleagues and I have received numerous calls from major research institutions and developers looking for a, quote, community partner days before their EPIC grant application is due, with 90% of the application finished. We are looking to improve that level of outreach. As EJ advocate Luke Cole would say, what good is a seat at the table when you are still on the menu? How do you all, thank you, I appreciate it. How do you all as researchers and developers begin to build healthy relationships with the community experts that are going to help your technology succeed, scale, and transform California? A couple initial tips. Partner with trusted community-based organizations. Ask questions, listen, respect and center local leadership. Don't use outreach methods that are culturally insensitive, out of the predominantly spoken language, or on a technological platform that few have access to. So folks mentioned lack of internet access, broadband, smartphone. Folks are always asking us for advice about their apps, and our response is always, you shouldn't have done an app, probably. We want to get that on the front end. So, meet communities where they are at physically and metaphorically. Go to the communities you seek to build relationships with and show up with curiosity and something to offer. State your commitment to community-led design, implementation, and evaluation. Have a community engagement plan for every step of your project and subsequent analysis. Pay local experts. Do not demand the labor of economically vulnerable residents for free when you are getting paid. Prioritize the delivery of non-energy, community-focused benefits in your projects. Develop strong non-energy benefit metrics for your project and track your performance. Share that information with the rest of us so we can help scale solutions across the state. If you are looking for positive examples of diverse parties working across difference with strong community leadership, check out the recent decision in the San Joaquin Valley proceeding from December of last year approving 11 beneficial pilots issued under the leadership of Commissioner Guzman Aceves. Told you I was Midwestern. California has an incredibly rich network of community-based organizations willing to partner with you and share their expertise. Don't miss out on the incredible opportunity to equitably innovate in the beautiful state of California. In the words of Patricia Hill Collins, relationships are the primary site of social change. The time is now to build a new, healthy, and respectful relationship between innovators, regulators, researchers, and environmental justice communities. Let's continue the work together. California's climate, environment, communities, ratepayers, and innovators like you will all benefit. Thanks.
Okay, and right before I go to questions, I'm going to give everyone one last opportunity. I think we all heard today why we need to take this to scale. We all know that not only do we need to do it for statutory reasons, but we need to do it to get to our climate goals. We heard about relationships. We heard about learning from other countries, about selecting strategic locations, about really getting involved with decision makers. So I want to give everyone a final opportunity to give your best tip to the audience on how we take this to scale, how you replicate all of this good work, whether it's financing or anything else that hasn't been mentioned or you want to reinforce, and then we're going to get to you guys. So I'm going to start with Michelle for your final tip to our colleagues.
Hello. They said to lean in close because it's WebEx. I think one very important pressure point that could affect a lot of, all affordable housing in California is the TCAC scoring. So TCAC is the Tax Credit Allocation Committee. So basically, it is the organization in California that determines kind of, to what extent you get tax credits for your affordable housing properties. And the way affordable housing is developed, you need TCAC. Otherwise, you just can't. The finances don't work. And so currently, you need to get, there's a lot of points you need to get based off of such things as you know, is it in a disadvantaged community? Is it, you know, environmentally friendly and everything like that? But it's so competitive that pretty much all properties already have to have full points. And so pretty much the only determination comes from the tiebreaker process. The tiebreaker is the last point available, and it is this unholy formula that incorporates 7 different things based off of, you know, what extent you are, you know, like how environmentally friendly you are, how cheap are your rents, and it just feels like muddled politics because you're combining 35 different things in one formula. And so if we are really trying to prioritize, you know, electrifying new buildings, if we're trying to prioritize decarbonization by 2050, we need to have that tiebreaker advocate for one point only, which is, you know, how environmentally friendly is this, or is this an all-electrical building? So I think, you know, that's something where that's going to immediately affect all affordable housing in California.
So what I would probably reiterate what the other speakers have said, which is, you know, a lot of times when we come in with new technologies or we look at technology solutions, we always go to the most highest affordability areas and work our way down. I think when we look at where we want to go with our policy goals and decarbonization goals, I think going from the affordable communities, you're going to achieve better quality of life. You're going to probably be able to achieve scalability. Might not be the solutions that you have on hand today, but look at developing solutions that target affordable communities and then scale up from there. I think that's going to achieve multiple goals, both from assisting the occupants, the people who live in these communities, as well as achieving the larger policy goals for the state.
Thank you, Ron. Andy?
I hate to state the obvious. Is this on? Yeah. But funding. We work in the program space, and so there's just simply not, if you want to scale clean energy in these communities, in the affordable housing world, there will always be a need for programs. There has yet to be a market-based solution that has come along and solved the problems of the split incentive or solved the fact that most of the affordable housing developers are very cash-strapped. They have very little resources and capital to invest in these things. So there's always going to be a need for government funding or state and local funding and more of it. I think one of the big challenges there is to streamline access to it. The affordable housing developers that we work in with day in, day out spend the majority of their time cobbling together capital from a great variety of resources. Even if it's energy funding, there could be 5 or 6 different capital sources that they're tapping into. So there is a need to do some streamlining and delivery of those funds and delivery of those services.
You took my answer. I think that it's all about the money when it comes down to we need to flip over our infrastructure in a generation, and it's infrastructure that we spent 100 years building. So it's time to start investing in a future that we want. And I think that there's a lot of emphasis on making sure we fully understand a problem so that we're not accidentally investing too much, that we're not pushing. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think that we should be worried that we're investing too little and that we need to just start taking risks as a society and taking risks that have some upside risk. And, you know, sometimes we're going to overinvest, and in some ways that's fine because right now we're underinvested. And I think that that's a much more significant risk than overinvestment.
I would say there are no shortcuts to community engagement. Don't be afraid of community engagement when scaling. That is essential. And I would also say there are no kind of one-size-fits-all solutions for the many diverse environmental justice communities across the state. And while there are no shortcuts, partnering with community-based leaders and organizations really help you focus on the common barriers that are experienced in different ways across the many communities in California.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to take some questions here now that we have a little bit of time left. Yes, sir. And please introduce yourself for the group.
Rob Freda, Gen H, we're a hydro company. So I had a quick question. It seems that you're basically, most of these solutions are in low-intensity areas, low population density, low intensity. And about 80% of the populations are urban and high-intensity areas. So will they work for high-intensity areas? Usually they're primarily
That might be true for yours, but I wonder if either of your projects have some urban.
Yeah, oh, sorry. A lot of our properties are actually in the Southern California region, and a lot of them are actually in high-density areas. So we have quite a few projects in Willowbrook, for instance, which is in South LA. And so I would say that, they definitely work in those places. I think it kind of even makes more sense because especially since, we focus on Southern California, something that I've started paying attention to is the fact that, the LA metro area has the worst air pollution in the country, because of the port systems. And one thing that we're starting to look at is when you have these high-efficiency HVAC solutions, they really make a difference in residents' air quality since, we do spend 90% of our time indoors anyway. And so in that respect, it's been an easy sell for us to talk about these solutions in high-density, high-urban areas.
I guess I was asking more about the level of energy supply that can be cleaned within those areas. In other words, if the object is to clean up the health and the energy system, it's a completely different problem in an urban area, which is why most of the country is supplied by natural gas.
You're saying, are they sourcing their electricity locally?
No, what I'm saying is that in order to supply the intensity of the energy in urban locations, the last 20 years have indicated the market is almost universally tended toward natural gas.
Sure.
So there isn't enough renewable intensity there to supply the population. So in what way can that be addressed?
So I could comment on that, which is there's two ways of solving this problem. If we want to electrify everything in cities, we've got distributed solar that can provide some amount of generation within city centers. And we can build transmission lines to bring in electricity from outside. I think it's not an insurmountable problem to imagine an electrified city technologically. It'll take some investment.
Present.
My name is Jean Wu. I work at a company called Custom Power Solar. We do solar. We specialize in storage and including EVs. And the important thing to remember about solar plus storage is when you have a high enough density, you can combine them, and under DER rules, you can buy into the wholesale market. So you can actually make money for the owners of these companies.
Back there?
Hi, I'm John Mitchell with JJMA, and I want to thank you all for really intriguing and exciting work and your presentations. I have questions for several of you, actually. Andy, I was wondering about your upcoming RMI implementation of Netherlands out-of-the-box measures. With reflecting on the idea of having this type of work done locally by local, are you going to be working towards achieving that goal? And have you been exploring where some of that portfolio could be generated locally, either materials or even products through 3D printing? And Peter, have you looked at the impact of the decrease in demand charges for these facilities because they are so high we all know that's a very difficult part of their demand. And Madeline, thank you for your speech. I was trying to write it down. I couldn't. Can you provide it by email? It was so wonderful. I didn't catch it at first, but I'll get it from you. Okay. Thank you.
So, yeah, we are going to be working with some local manufacturers. The Energy Strong model is very much focused around two primary technologies. One is a panelized envelope retrofit system that goes on in a matter of days. It's basically an enclosure over an enclosure. And there are some modular manufacturers, local modular manufacturers, working on panelized systems. I've been less involved with that than the RMI folks, but they've been in deep discussions with those organizations. So there is a goal to do some work with local manufacturers. And then the other kind of main technology is packaged mechanical systems that can be retrofitted essentially to the outside of the building or someplace central. And again, we're working with not necessarily local manufacturers, they're more national.
With respect to demand charges, at a commercial building like a gas station, demand charges are half the bill or more, depending on the load factor, and that's definitely part of the value proposition for energy storage behind the meter for these customers, and also for the demand-responsive refrigeration and HVAC systems. So our system is designed to optimize the bill for this customer, and that can include demand charge management, some arbitrage, and if there's any kind of demand response program serving the needs of the grid that involves payments, that would all be part of the math.
Yes, sir?
Nehemiah Stone Energy Associates. Peter, I was curious to see that your package did not include efficiency, and it seems to me that there's got to be a point at which the size of your solar system is you could save money on by putting efficiency in first. And so, why was that not part of your package?
The frank reason it wasn't part of our package is because the funding opportunity we're going after wasn't an efficiency opportunity. It was one for solar and storage. So that's, but I should say that this site has undergone recently an energy efficiency retrofit previous to our project. They still have relatively inefficient equipment. These small packaged HVAC units and refrigeration units aren't that great. So yes, I'm all for efficiency, but that's not what the focus of this project is on.
So when you were talking about being able to scale up specifically on convenience stores, you talked about how inefficient they are. It seems to me that to scale up in a way that makes sense, you've got to figure out the efficiency piece first.
Good point. Unless you had a different point.
Well, I should preface, I love energy efficiency. I'm driving home tonight so I can teach a class about energy efficiency tomorrow at Humboldt State University. Solar and storage is getting so cheap that sometimes it's cheaper to put solar panels on the roof than it is to make an efficiency upgrade. It's just the reality. And I'm not advocating for always doing that. But in a case where solar is a winner versus a very complicated efficiency upgrade, you might just go ahead and put solar.
Incidentally, as we look to our next question, there are states currently forming legislative proposals to reform some of their large energy efficiency portfolios to greenhouse gas reduction portfolios. So it kind of allows you to be more flexible with that. Yes.
Hi, Jessica Iniguez at the Green Lining Institute. I had two questions. One centered on trust, building that community trust after so many fraudulent cases have occurred, and I've seen this very much so in LA and with solar panels and the fraudulent incidents that have happened. So I was wondering if you all had any perspective on the idea of community trust, especially if you are an outside organization. And my second question, I was wondering what type of workforce equity programs you all have instrumented within the programs that you have done within the community as a whole.
One thing that we started exploring is looking at how we could work closely with property managers on site. So property managers and regional managers. We have one property, City Gardens in Santa Ana, Orange County, where the property manager, Karina Guzman, she's been there for 10 years. And when I was visiting, she knew every single resident who lived there. She, was pretty much the backup maintenance staff. And that's one opportunity for affordable housing. You generally do need a property manager. And a lot of times they're there for years, decades, and they have that trust so that when we do come in and we say, hey, we want to, install something that might lead to tenants having to leave their apartments for a couple of weeks, we work with them to make sure that the tenants are, they understand what's happening, they understand why we're doing it, we make sure to address their needs. And for us, that's very important because, we're in this because we care about housing, we care about getting homes. And we try to make sure that people understand that, just because they don't own a property doesn't mean that it can't be a home for them as well.
And for, at least in the research projects that we've worked on, where we are doing outreach to tenants to kind of volunteer their apartments for demonstrations. We've done a number of kind of community engagement meetings where we have gone in the evening to properties, and basically they have at their resident meetings given a very detailed overview of what the project is and what's being asked of them. And in some cases, we've had to bring translators for those events. And it seems to go over very, very well, as long as you're being very clear and articulate with what it is you're planning on doing, and what the potential benefit is to them. They've been very receptive.
And does anyone want to answer the second question? Well, just, your So the question is on workforce equity, any lessons to share, successes?
Some of the programs that we implement, there are workforce training requirements associated with them, so where we are doing local training for, say, solar installers, but not so much in the research project. It depends on the program.
Michelle?
One opportunity that we're looking to explore is with these energy efficiency upgrades and with solar itself. Our residents, they're saving, they could be saving like $10 or something a month, and you look at all of these PowerPoints that have been happening today, and it just says it saves money. Because I think for a lot of us in this room, $10 a month, that's nice, that's an extra latte. But for a lot of our residents, $10, $15 a month, that's quite a lot of money. And so, we started having discussions over what can we do in terms of having, financial literacy classes. What can you do in terms of, how do you use that $10 to take classes and stuff like that, to make sure that, we're not just imposing these efficiency upgrades with them, we're constantly connecting them to what our residents want. To kind of echo what Madeline mentioned, it's never just energy or jobs, it has to be both.
Hi, my name is Judith Schwartz. I'm from To The Point. I was very intrigued by your presentations where you talk about asking the tenants what they feel and what they wanted and whether it's the small business owner. And one of the barriers that I've seen to supporting some community solar and sort of retrofitting projects is the belief that if you are talking to the landlord who is getting a financial benefit or somehow a housing authority, that somehow the tenants won't feel connected. And so could you talk a little bit more about that side of things and how you went back to other key influencers or stakeholders to say, look, this really does working? Because I think in the work that I do, I'd love to have some more research to be able to point to say, look, it really does have an impact, and they get it.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, a couple things. So in terms of split incentives or tenant protections, that's something at Greenlining we're always advocating for tenant protections in whatever clean energy investment, because such an upgrade, folks are mentioning the level of housing or the structure, and a significant investment coming from a clean energy program can place not just not benefit a tenant, but it could also place a burden on a tenant. And so you can look to SOMA, the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing Program, as one example where the credit actually is split. Part of it goes to the landlord directly, and the majority of it goes to the tenant, and that's the thing that folks advocated for in that proceeding. You can also have affidavits or sworn agreements between the landlord and the tenant and the program administrator or another party to ensure that rent isn't increased as a result of the investment in the property. But I think in terms of getting that buy-in, if there's not community design and if there's not a financial benefit to the tenant, then it's not something necessarily I would see as in their interest. So I think the challenge is designing a program that does benefit everyone, focusing on those most in need.
I'll just add on the tenant protection piece, and Commissioner Sevas mentioned this earlier. I think one place where this is going to play out and be a major issue in the coming years is in the realm of electrification. So right now, the low-income weatherization program that we implement for CSD is an electrification program. And when you're going in and electrifying gas end uses, so changing from a lower cost fuel to a higher cost fuel, there's certainly the potential for the tenants' utility bills to go up, which is antithetical to everything we're trying to achieve. In the LIWIP program, we've been able to counter that because it's a very holistic program where we're able to do, regular energy efficiency load reduction measures in parallel with electrification as well as on-site solar. So electrification is always being balanced by those things, and the bills have continued to go down. But we are now getting ready to roll out another program that is just pure electrification for affordable housing. And that's where we're going to have to figure out how do we deal with that issue, because there is the potential that if you go in and just do electrification, there could be a negative impact. So in the short term, it's going to be a matter of packaging those electrification retrofits with other EE programs and dollars, which is still a cobbling effort and cumbersome. In the future, there's going to be a lot of need to do rate design and rate design policies that will accommodate for electrification, because we are fully in the climate panic mode right now where we can't go do a holistic 40% energy savings project on every single property to achieve our climate goals. We are going to have to run around and do a lot of electrification quickly. And in order to do that, we have to have rate solutions that will address that issue and prevent those low-income Californians from getting harmed by it.
Okay, I'm going to take a final question and allow everyone to answer the question and also just give any final thoughts that you might have that you forgot to mention somehow. Okay.
Jim Hawley at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Actually, there's a question for Andy. Just had a question. I know the Association for Energy Affordability has done a lot of work in other states on multifamily, and I was wondering if there are any best practices or success stories that you would share from other states that we could learn from here in California.
Yeah, I worked in New York before moving to California, and I would say it's kind of along the same lines of what I've said about California. Here, the CSD program, the Low-Income Weatherization Program, has been a really good venue or avenue or vehicle for us to deploy new technologies because they've been flexible and kind of been able to move quickly, pretty nimble. In New York, the experience was around, most of that same work was done under the federal DOE weatherization program. So I guess the main thing is I think that weatherization programs often don't get the kind of innovation credit that they deserve, mainly because they've got the word weatherization in their title, and people associate weatherization with air sealing and insulation, and they don't understand that they can actually be much more comprehensive programs. And in New York, that's the same scenario. That program is probably the most comprehensive program offered to multifamily low-income properties there. So that I think Ron probably also has some out-of-state experience that he's brought to a lot of this project as well.
Well, why don't we do final thoughts and we'll go this way. Andy, if you want to finish up any final thoughts, and then, okay, thank you. Peter?
Sure. I work at a university, and I really value the opportunity to be a link between R&D work and the communities we partner with. And it's not just about doing the research, but it means that when we go do tours, we can have a tour of tribal youth from Rancheria, from adjacent nations, who can come see this work in a place where they're comfortable, and then talk to somebody who works at a university where they might see themselves going to school. And I think that there's a really strong pathway there that is part of doing work in communities where it also shows what's possible to the youth. And I think that working through universities is, we do good R&D work, of course, but then we're also workforce developing engines for the state. Thankful for the opportunity.
Yeah. I hope you all go make new friends, starting today. And in this room, there are a lot of beautiful people. Get on it. And also, if you have difficulty making friends and want help on partnering with others for EPIC projects, I'm happy to share my contact information. Greenlining, we're committed to implementing AB 523 with our partners that worked on the bill to make sure there are more relationships with the folks here and more projects like theirs moving forward. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
That's going to be a tough one to follow. Very quickly, so I think we should also look at national efforts, especially things around, say, for example, manufactured housing that doesn't follow state codes that we have to have. California has to collaborate with Georgia, with New York, with Illinois. Let's do that on a national basis because that addresses a lot of the affordable housing populations. And if you're going to do projects, if you're going to work with these communities, do the things that help the customers. Replace the windows, add insulation. These might not pencil out, okay? But these are the things that actually make their life better. So make that a part of whatever upgrades you're doing or projects you're doing.
I would have to say, I only moved to California a couple of years ago, and it just continually astounds me the level of discourse we're having surrounding, both inability and also in terms of, environmental justice. And, sometimes these things, they get complicated, you get bogged down in details, but I think to myself, we're in the Wild Wild West. No one else is as far in this process as we are. And so, we're figuring it out because no one else has figured it out before. So if that helps you guys go through another long day, then
Please
that
help
helps
me
me.
thank our fellow. Thank you, Michelle.